Chapter 1196. The Lion sect did not care about the betrayal that Wan Shan had mentioned. Just as he had said, the alliance was only formed for the sake of benefits. Since the sacred palace was able to offer even greater benefits, it was only natural that the Thousand Beast Valley would turn traitor. The killing intent in Wan Shan's eyes grew even stronger when he heard Lion Sect's answer. At the same time, his attacks became even fiercer. Lion Sect sneered as he blocked Wan Shan's attacks. "You want to kill me? But can you do it?" Wan Shan really wanted to kill Lion Zong now. Unfortunately, both of them were existences in the great perfection of the quasi-sage realm. At their level, it could be said that it was very difficult to kill them. The difficulty of killing a quasi-sage great venerate was probably dozens or even hundreds of times more difficult than killing a saint. At the quasi-saint realm, one's vitality could already be described as terrifying. Therefore, Lion Sect was not afraid of Wan Shan's rage at all. Moreover, Lion Sect's current mission was to delay Wan Shan and wait for Jiang Taishan's trio and Ku Gui's victory to be decided. At that time, Wan Shan would naturally be doomed. The battle between Lion Sect and Wan Shan was intense. However, anyone with discerning eyes could see that although the battle between the two was intense, no one could do anything to the other. Especially Lion Sect, he had no intention of going all out against Wan Shan. This gave Wan Shan a headache. While Lion Sect and Wan Shan fought fiercely, Jiang Taishan, Tianju, and Man Gu were also fighting fiercely with Ku Gui. Ku Gui, who was wearing a loose black robe and had a thin and short figure, did not fall into any disadvantage when facing the siege of Jiang Taishan's trio. Jiang Taishan's trio were all existences at the perfect quasi-saint realm and were the strongest great sovereigns of the North Star boundary along with Ku Gui. Ku Gui did not show any signs of defeat even when facing three existences at the same level as him. From this, it could be seen that Ku Gui's strength was indeed incomparably powerful. He was indeed worthy of the title of the North Star boundary's most ancient and strongest quasi-saint great sovereign. With every movement, Withered Ghost was surrounded by a dense ghostly aura. When he struck out with his palm, the ghostly aura swept toward Jiang Taishan and the other two like a blanket. Fortunately, Jiang Taishan and the other two were strong. Otherwise, if it were any other quasi-sage great sovereign, they would have been killed by the Withered Ghost. Jiang Taishan and the others weren't surprised by Ku Gui's terrifying strength. After all, this was something they had long expected. If it weren't for Ku Gui's strength, why would Jiang Taishan and the others be so afraid of him? The four peerless powerhouses who stood at the top of the North Star boundary, existences who were only one step away from the Great Sage Realm, were engaged in a fierce battle at this moment. All kinds of magical powers emerged one after another, and even the other quasi-sage and great venerables didn't dare to approach the place where the four of them were fighting. After all, the residual power was simply too ferocious, and the slightest carelessness might cause them to be affected. With a palm strike, a ghostly claw condensed from ghostly chi descended from the sky, like a mountain pressing down on Jiang Taishan. Facing the attacks of the withered ghosts, Jiang Taishan's expression was calm. Golden light flashed as the god race's ability was used. The golden light and the ghostly claw fiercely collided, and then both exploded in the air at the same time, slowly dissipating. After successfully blocking the attack of the withered ghost, Jiang Taishan said coldly, "Ku Gui, you're old. If you were a few hundred years younger, perhaps the three of us wouldn't be able to do anything to you. But now, you're on the verge of death, and your strength is far from what it was in your prime. I'm afraid you don't have much of a chance today." Jiang Taishan's words were indeed true. The withered ghost was old, and after living for so many years, his strength was at the top of the entire North Star boundary. However, no matter how strong he was, it was difficult to resist the erosion of time. Ordinary people would die, saints would die, quasi-sages and great venerables would die, and even great sages couldn't surpass time and resist the erosion of time. It was hard to say whether there was anyone in this world who could truly achieve immortality, but at the very least, no one had ever heard of anyone who could live forever. Time was the most terrifying power in this world. No matter how strong you were, no matter what your cultivation was, time would always be able to crush you alive unknowingly. Take the current withered ghost for example. He had lived for thousands of years, and his cultivation was exceedingly high, but he still couldn't escape time. Now that he was old, his body was far from being as strong as it was in his prime. This was something that the withered ghost himself didn't deny. His current body was too weak, and Jiang Taishan and the other two could exhaust him to death. The withered ghost already knew this, so he was certain that the Night Ghost Pavilion would lose. Otherwise, if he was at his prime, even if he was alone, he wouldn't be afraid of Jiang Taishan and the other two. Hearing Jiang Taishan's words, the withered ghost smiled bitterly. Yes, old people are indeed useless, but the three of you are a little too arrogant. You have to know that even if you're old enough to lose your teeth, a tiger is still a tiger. He admitted that he was old, but the withered ghost also said that the Jiang Taishan trio were too arrogant. Hearing this, Jiang Taishan remained silent, while Tianju's eyes flashed with a trace of seriousness. However, the three of them didn't have to wait. Soon, a terrifying aura suddenly erupted from the withered ghost's body. This aura had faintly surpassed the quasi-sage level. This was an aura that surpassed the quasi-sage level. This was, feeling the terrifying aura that suddenly erupted from the withered ghost's body, the Jiang Taishan trio were stunned, and Tianju couldn't help but murmur. Great Saint Stage? You broke through to the Great Saint Stage? Above the quasi-sage level was the Great Saint Stage. This level was equivalent to a legendary existence in the current North Star boundary. It had been at least tens of thousands of years since a great saint emperor had appeared in the North Star boundary. If the withered ghost really broke through to the Great Saint Stage, then there was no doubt that everyone present would die. The strength of a great saint emperor was absolutely enough to change the color of heaven and earth. Although there were many quasi-sage great venerables in the 5 great sects, in front of a great saint emperor, it was still not enough. This was like the gap between the quasi-sage level and the saint stage. Was it not so great that a quasi-sage great venerate could easily crush a saint stage expert? By the same logic, a great saint emperor could also easily crush a quasi-sage great venerate. Moreover, the gap between the two was even greater than the gap between the quasi-sage level and the saint stage. It was so great that it was unimaginable. Not only Tianju, but Jiang Taishan and Huang Gu's expressions also changed drastically. However, in the face of the trio's surprise, the withered ghost chuckled a little self-deprecatingly. The great sage level isn't so easy to break through. Don't worry, this old man hasn't broken through to the great saint stage yet. If I have to say, this old man's true realm should be at the half-step great saint stage. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1197. He hadn't broken through to the great saint realm, but was only one step away from the quasi-saint realm. He could be considered a half-step great saint. At this moment, the withered ghost's originally thin and short figure seemed to have grown infinitely taller. He simply stood there, but at this moment, he was like a huge mountain that stood in front of Jiang Taishan and the other two. Hearing Ku Gui's words, Jiang Taishan and the other two didn't feel the slightest bit happy. On the contrary, their expressions were grave to the extreme. Half-step great saint was an existence that surpassed the quasi-saint realm. All along, Jiang Taishan and the other two had only thought that Ku Gui's cultivation should be at the peak of the quasi-saint realm. Who would have thought that Ku Gui had finally taken that step? Although it was only half a step, it was already shocking enough. Looking at Ku Gui's slightly bitter smile, Tianju sighed silently. Is this the number one expert of the North Star realm? Half-step great saint, Ku Gui had occupied the position of the number one expert of the North Star realm for thousands of years. In these thousands of years, no matter how turbulent the North Star realm was or how the situation changed, Ku Gui still firmly held the number one position in the North Star realm. Perhaps it was because he was already old, but in recent years, Ku Gui had rarely shown himself, let alone fought with others. Perhaps it was because Ku Gui's silence that people gradually forgot how powerful he used to be. Today, Ku Gui, who was already on the verge of death, finally showed his powerful side once again. Facing Jiang Taishan and the other two who were stunned in place, Ku Gui smiled. This should be the last battle of this old man's life. Perhaps it's not bad to end like this. Come, let's do it. Saying that, Kugue's right hand slowly reached out, and at the same time, a terrifying aura spread out. This aura was like an invisible hand that instantly grasped Jiang Taishan and the other two. Feeling the appearance of this inexplicable power, Jiang Taishan and the other two didn't hesitate and attacked at the same time. However, Withered Ghost didn't show any reaction. He stretched out his right hand and clenched it. Suddenly, the space where the four of them were fighting shattered like a mirror. One must know that this was the void. The space in the void was at least 100 times stronger than the outside world. A quasi-sage great venerable couldn't break the space in the void, but Withered Ghost did it. With just a clench of his fist, cracks appeared in the surrounding space. The void is shattered. Looking at the dense cracks around him, Baron blurted out subconsciously. But before he could react, he felt as though his body was being gripped tightly and couldn't break free for a moment. Not only Huang Gu, but Jiang Taishan and Tianju were also doing the same. At this moment, the three of them didn't dare to be careless in the slightest. They all erupted with their strongest power. The mark of the heavenly clan appeared on Tianju's forehead. A white light bloomed from the mark and quickly wrapped around Tianju's body. Jiang Taishan's whole body shone with golden light. His whole person seemed to have turned into a golden man. The dazzling light made it impossible for people to open their eyes. There was also Huang Gu. At this time, Huang Gu's originally huge body grew even bigger. He was originally 5 meters tall, but now he had grown to nearly 20 meters. At the same time, his skin was suffused with a faint green luster. His whole person was like an indestructible boulder. The three of them all brought out their special skills. They underestimated Withered Ghost. They didn't expect Withered Ghost to have broken through the quasi-sage stage and reached the half-step great sage stage. As a result, the three of them naturally didn't dare to be careless in the slightest. At the same time, the three of them used all their strength to forcibly break through Withered Ghost's restraint. Withered Ghost didn't seem to be surprised by this. He flipped his palm and pressed it down. At the same time, the ghost claw condensed from endless ghost chi appeared in the void again. However, this time, the ghost claw was many times larger than before. It was almost the size of a continent. Following the suppression of this ghost claw, Jiang Taishan and the others' faces turned gloomy. Tianju was the first to shout. "Let's attack together." It was absolutely impossible to win against Withered Ghost alone. The slightest carelessness could even lead to serious injuries. Therefore, Tianju didn't hesitate and shouted directly. Only when the three of them joined forces could they tangle with Withered Ghost. However, from the current situation, it was still impossible to defeat Withered Ghost. The three of them attacked at the same time, sending out powerful attacks that went straight for the huge ghost claw descending from the sky. The four attacks collided fiercely, and a terrifying aftershock instantly swept through the void. Even the quasi-sage great sovereigns who were fighting fiercely in the distance looked at the place where Withered Ghost and the others were fighting in astonishment. As quasi-sage great sovereigns, there were very few things in the world that could surprise them. However, the battle between Withered Ghost and Jiang Taishan and the other two still left them dumbfounded. This was because this was no longer a power that quasi-sage stage could possess. The four attacks collided fiercely. Immediately, the void was broken and a terrifying void storm overflowed. However, at Withered Ghost's, Jiang Taishan's, and the others' realms, the void storm was no longer a threat. Therefore, the four of them didn't move at all. This was a head-on collision. To everyone's surprise, the combined power of Jiang Taishan and the other two was unable to break through the Withered Ghost's palm. The gigantic ghostly claw that was as large as a continent still did not dissipate and continued to rumble towards Jiang Taishan and the other two. Seeing this scene, Jiang Taishan didn't have time to think and immediately shouted, "Again." Saying that, the three of them attacked again. Twice in a row, the three of them joined forces and didn't hold back in the slightest. Only then did they shatter Withered Ghost's palm. It was such a simple palm, but Jiang Taishan and the others found it so difficult to resist. At this time, the three of them were already thinking of retreating. The strength of a half-step great saint was indeed too strong. Although it was only a half-step, it couldn't be compared to a quasi-sage stage. Facing Withered Ghost's absolute strength, Jiang Taishan and the others already had thoughts of retreating. In just one move, the three of them instinctively felt that they might die against Withered Ghost. No one would believe that a Great Circle quasi-sage stage expert could be killed by someone else. However, it was different now. Withered Ghost should have the ability to kill quasi-sage great sovereigns. He just needed to spend some effort. Jiang Taishan said hesitantly, "It seems that we still underestimated the number one expert of the North Star field. This battle might, please add, please vote, please recommend." Chapter 1198. It seems that we still underestimated the number one expert of the North Star field. Perhaps this battle. Jiang Taishan said with a hint of respect in his tone and expression. Putting aside everything else, Withered Ghost was a person worthy of respect, even for Jiang Taishan, Huanggu, Tianzhu, and the Lion Sect. This kind of respect wasn't because Ku Gui's seniority was higher than theirs, but because Ku Gui's life could be said to be miraculous. Who wouldn't respect someone who had such a life? An old tiger was still a tiger. At this moment, Withered Ghost had proven his words with his actions. Jiang Taishan had the idea of retreating temporarily. But before he could speak, Withered Ghost, who originally had the absolute advantage, suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood. This change immediately made Jiang Taishan's words come to an abrupt end. Withered Ghost clearly had the upper hand before, so why did he spit out blood now? Jiang Taishan and the other two looked at Withered Ghost with puzzled expressions. Withered Ghost's face was even paler, and did not seem to be faking it. After a moment of observation, Tianzhu said, "Am I still old?" It was certain that Withered Ghost was not faking it. It was because his body could not withstand the power of a half-step great sage. Withered Ghost was too old, and his body's various functions had deteriorated. His once powerful physical body had long since ceased to exist with the passage of time. If one's cultivation was water, then one's physical body would be the container. Now, Withered Ghost's physical body was like a broken container. Since it was broken, the water inside naturally flowed out. It was true that Withered Ghost had the cultivation of a half-step great sage, but his physical body could no longer withstand the power of a half-step great sage. Normally, it would be fine if he did not fight, but after a fierce battle, Withered Ghost had circulated the demon chi in his body with all his strength, causing the demon chi to go berserk. His physical body could not withstand the power of the demon chi, so it was natural that he was injured. The three who were originally planning to retreat for the time being obviously did not need to do so anymore, because Withered Ghost's strength just now was like a flash in the pan. At this moment, he could no longer erupt with the same power as before. The outcome was already decided. Withered Ghost was old, but facing the imminent victory, Jiang Taishan and the other two did not have the slightest joy. On the contrary, they looked at Withered Ghost with complicated expressions. This old man, the old man in front of him, had stood tall in the North Star boundary for countless years. His glory was once limitless. Relying on him alone, the Night Ghost Pavilion could be said to have suppressed all the heroes in the North Star boundary and firmly sat as the number one quasi-sage sect in the North Star boundary. It could be said that the Night Ghost Pavilion had once ruled over the North Star realm and was the undisputed number one quasi-sage sect in the North Star realm. During that time, people like the Supreme Deity sect and the Myriad Beasts Valley had no choice but to lower their heads and retreat when facing the Night Ghost Pavilion. And all of this was brought about by this old man who was on the verge of death. Ku Gui was not the founder of the Night Ghost Pavilion, and it was impossible for him to break through to the Great Saint realm. In terms of cultivation and ultimate height, Ku Gui could not compare to the Great Saint Emperors of the North Star boundary from ancient times. But in modern times, Withered Ghost was worthy of the title of the number one person in the North Star boundary. Although he was not the Great Sage, he was able to turn the tide as a quasi-sage and firmly hold the number one position in the North Star boundary for thousands of years. Although he was not the great sage, he had relied on his own strength to bring the Night Ghost Pavilion to unprecedented heights. At the very least, he had once become the North Star boundary's overlord and the number one quasi-sage sect. This glory was the proof of Withered Ghost's legendary life. What people liked to talk about the most was that Withered Ghost was not actually from an aristocratic family, but an orphan. Withered Ghost had no parents since birth and had been abandoned by his parents. When he was young, Withered Ghost had been a beggar and had bitterly struggled to survive in the moral world. He had experienced the fickleness of human nature, the joys and sorrows of the moral world. A lowly orphan, a lowly ant, had walked step by step to the peak of the North Star boundary, a peak that the 5 people of his generation dared to compete with. Withered Ghost's aura was gradually weakening and becoming chaotic. At this moment, Withered Ghost was like a candle that was about to burn out. Facing Withered Ghost, Jiang Taishan and the other 2 couldn't help but recall their youth. When Jiang Taishan and the others were still young and had yet to become quasi-sage great venerates, Withered Ghost was already the number one great venerate of the Night Ghost Pavilion. At that time, Withered Ghost was in the prime of his life and was full of mettle. Under his leadership, the Night Ghost Pavilion had never tasted defeat. With the power of a single sect, he had suppressed the Supreme Divine Sect, Liwang Sect, Myriad Beast Valley, Ninth Heaven, and the Demonic Sky Palace. Withered Ghost's name alone was enough to make quasi-sage great venerates of the same generation retreat. Withered Ghost's life was glorious and inspirational. He used his entire life to teach everyone in the North Star boundary a truth. If one wanted to become an expert, one didn't have to come from an aristocratic family. Even if one's family background was ordinary, even if one was born as lowly as an ant, as long as one worked hard, as long as one wanted to, as long as one was willing to put in the effort, there would be a day when one could reach a height that no one else could reach. Withered Ghost was like this. He had walked out of the lowest dark abyss and stepped onto the pedestal that was the focus of everyone's attention. Such an old man made people involuntarily respect him. Regardless of whether he was right or wrong, Withered Ghost deserved the respect of everyone in the North Star boundary. Thinking back to the past, if Jiang Taishan and the other 2 made a move now, they could clearly take advantage of the opportunity to severely injure Withered Ghost. Even if they couldn't kill him, they could definitely seriously injure him. However, the 3 of them didn't choose to make a move. They just stood there quietly and watched. At the same time, Wan Shan, who was fighting fiercely with the Lion Sect in the distance, forced the Lion Sect to retreat as soon as he felt Withered Ghost's aura weaken. He quickly rushed to Withered Ghost's side. As the number one great venerate of the Demonic Sky Palace, Wan Shan's eyes turned red and he spoke with a sobbing tone as he felt the increasingly dense aura of death on Withered Ghost's body. "Uncle, you, Wan Shan, who was at the great perfection of the quasi-sage stage, naturally knew Withered Ghost's current situation. It was almost time for him to step into a coffin." However, before Wan Shan could say anything, Withered Ghost waved his hand, indicating that he didn't need to say anything. Then, he looked at Jiang Taishan and the other 2 and the Lion Sect, who had rushed over, and smiled bitterly. "I'm really old. Why, aren't you going to make a move? Begging for your collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendation." Chapter 1199. "What? You're still not going to attack?" Ku Gui said indifferently, but Jiang Taishan and the others still had no intention of attacking. On the contrary, after exchanging a glance, they all cupped their hands and bowed to Ku Gui. "Senior, please stop. You know you're going to lose, so why fight to the death? We don't want to attack Senior anymore. We only ask Senior to stop and surrender." If Jiang Taishan and the others wanted to attack Ku Gui now, they definitely had a great chance of killing him here because Ku Gui's body couldn't withstand any more consumption. If he continued to fight, he would undoubtedly die. Jiang Taishan and the others had no intention of attacking this old man who was undeniably worthy of respect. In any case, the outcome was already decided and Ku Gui didn't have much time left. As such, they might as well give this legendary old man a dignified ending. But hearing this, Kugui replied with a smile. You four brats, this old man already expected this result. How could this old man not know his own body? This old man has fought countless battles in his life. When I was young, I fought in the streets to fill my stomach. When I was a little older, I stepped onto the martial path. In order to improve, I fought with cultivators. Later on, I became the holy son of the Night Ghost Pavilion, a great sovereign, and finally the #1 great sovereign. This old man has encountered too many opponents. After fighting for a lifetime, this old man doesn't want to see this old man surrender before he dies. But since the four of you aren't willing to attack, then let this old man do it. Saying that, Kugui forcibly circulated the last of his strength to counterattack before he died. Seeing this, the expressions of Jiang Taishan and the others changed slightly, and they all secretly began to be on guard. Although Withered Ghost was on the verge of death, no one would dare to underestimate his counterattack before his death. While guarding against Kugui's attack, Tianju asked, Senior, do you really want to continue? Everyone knew the current condition of Withered Ghost's body. Even if he could unleash another powerful attack, he would die without a doubt. Kugui didn't answer Tianju's question. Wan Shan, who was standing next to Kugui, shouted with bloodshot eyes and a hoarse voice. Uncle, let me do it. I'll destroy these four guys. Wan Shan also didn't want Kugui to continue, but Kugui said indifferently, Shan, don't be foolish. Shanzi, don't do anything stupid, and don't hold grudges. Just live well. This is my life. No matter how glorious a person's life is, there will be an end. Today is the end of this old man. At first, Wan Shan didn't understand what Kugui's words meant, but as soon as he heard these words, he felt a spatial force instantly enveloping him. He was not the only one who was affected. The other quasi-saint great venerables from the Night Ghost Pavilion and the Evil Sky Palace were also enveloped by the spatial energy. Originally, they were still in the midst of a fierce battle. However, as soon as the spatial energy appeared, both sides stopped fighting in confusion. Regardless of whether it was the Supreme Venerables of the Night Ghost Pavilion or the Evil Sky Palace, or the Supreme Venerables of the 5 great sects, all of them stopped fighting. They didn't know what the power of space represented, but at this moment, Jiang Taishan and the other 3 standing in front of Kugui changed their expressions. Ancient Desolation even shouted. Of the 2, only the Great Sage, or at least a half-step Great Sage, could perform spatial transfer. The most iconic thing about the Great Sage realm was the ability to control spatial power. Seeing clearly was controlling, not comprehending. Saints and quasi-saints had only comprehended spatial power, and they had only scratched the surface. The only thing they could do was open up a small space or tear space to travel through the void. The Great Sage had already mastered spatial power. Spatial transfer could be regarded as a teleportation formation. It could teleport people to any place as long as they didn't exceed the distance. They could see that Kugui was performing spatial transfer. The great to 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 the great. Clearly, Kugui wanted to use the last of his strength to send them away at the last moment. Realizing this, Mangu and Lion Zong wanted to make a move, but they were stopped by Jiang Taishan and Tianju. Tianju sighed and shook his head. Forget it. Let him do as he pleases. He didn't hesitate to use the last of his strength to send the great to the great to the great to the great. Jiang Taishan and Tianju gave up on stopping him. Kugui smiled when he saw the change in Jiang Taishan's and the other 3's expressions. Then, the figures of Wan Shan, the Night Ghost Pavilion, and the Evil Sky Palace's great sovereigns began to float. Clearly, the space transmission had begun. Just a second before they were about to be transferred away, Kugui's voice sounded in their ears. Everyone, everything in the world is fated. There is no race in the world that can prosper forever. Although the Evil Sky Palace and the Night Ghost Pavilion have perished today, this old man believes that one day, the Night Ghost Pavilion and the Evil Sky Palace will rise again. Everyone, have a safe journey. Wan Shan and the great to the great to the great to the great to be transferred away. In order to send them away, Ku Gui had used up the last of his strength. After spitting out 3 mouthfuls of blood, Ku Gui had reached the end. The light in his eyes gradually faded, but before he died, Ku Gui looked at Jiang Taishan and the others. He even glanced at Xiaoxing in the distance. His lips curved into a smile as he murmured in a hoarse voice. "You can sing. Let me take the stage. Don't laugh at the romance. Don't laugh at the absurdity of others. I once asked about the Golden Age. I once sang about the rise and fall. The Tao is emotionless, the Tao is emotional. How do you think?" Speaking of this, Ku Gui spat out another mouthful of blood. He was already on the verge of death. The scenery in front of him gradually blurred, but at the last moment, Ku Gui said these words. "It's time to end. Every era will have its own heroes, and this old man's era has passed." Facing death, Ku Gui calmly chose to face it. Perhaps he also felt that he no longer belonged to this era. After all, the people who were still active in this era, such as Jiang Taishan, Man Gu, and Tianju, were all Ku Gui's descendants, not to mention the new generation of saints like Xiaochen. As for those from the same era as Withered Ghost, they were all dead. Only Withered Ghost had remained standing, but now it was time for him to leave. How could a remnant of an era continue to sit in a high position and prevent the younger generation from ascending? Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1200. In every era, there would be a group of people who would lead the way, and in this group of people, there would eventually be a hero who would lead the generation. However, with the passing of generations, legends would eventually come to an end. At this moment, in front of Jiang Taishan and the other great sovereigns of the 5 great sects, Ku Gui, the legend of 2 generations, had fallen. His eyes were closed, but there was a smile on his face. A legend. Even in death, Ku Gui had never retreated. In the face of battle, Ku Gui looked down on everything. His only defeat was today, his death. Jiang Taishan and the other 3 great sovereigns bowed to Ku Gui's corpse from the bottom of their hearts because of Ku Gui's last words. "Will I appear after you finish singing?" Tianju couldn't help but sigh. Ku Gui had truly seen through everything. The old would eventually leave the stage, and the new generation would naturally be in charge of the new generation to write their own legends. As Jiang Taishan and the other 3 great sovereigns thought to themselves, the surrounding great sovereigns of the 5 great sects, including Xiaoxing and the others, also bowed respectfully to Ku Gui. Then, Tianju took the initiative to step forward and collect Ku Gui's corpse. How could such a legend be left in the wilderness? Tianju wanted to personally bury him. With Ku Gui dead, everything was a foregone conclusion. Although the great sovereigns of the Night Ghost Pavilion and Evil Sky Palace had escaped, what could a mere 5 people do? There was no need to worry. The battle in the void had ended, and when the great sovereigns once again appeared in the sky above the Night Ghost Pavilion, the battle in the outside world had already ended. The experts of the Night Ghost Pavilion and Evil Sky Palace had either died or surrendered. Moreover, the 5 great sects had already gathered those who had surrendered to watch over them. The battle in the outside world had already ended, and Xiaochen and the other saints and saintesses were now gathered together. Seeing the great sovereigns walk out of the void, the first saint of the Supreme Divine Sect, Bai Shi, smiled. "Looks like it's over." Since the great sovereigns of the 5 great sects had appeared, but the great sovereigns of the Night Ghost Pavilion and Evil Sky Palace had not appeared, it was clear that the result had already been decided. The disciples of the 5 great sects cheered. On the other hand, the disciples of the Night Ghost Pavilion and the Evil Sky Palace were ashen-faced. Even the Supreme Venerable had been defeated. It seemed like there was nothing they could do. He didn't mention anything about what had happened in the void. Those things were at the level of great venerables. Even the holy sons and holy daughters of the various sects weren't qualified to know about it. He immediately announced the destruction of the Night Ghost Pavilion and the demonic Sky Palace. At the same time, Jiang Taishan and the other three also announced that the cultivators of the Night Ghost Pavilion and the demonic Sky Palace who had surrendered would be crippled and allowed to leave. The withered ghost might be one of the reasons why he didn't kill these people. However, not killing them didn't mean that he was letting them go. If he destroyed their cultivation, these people would become useless. Even if he let them go, it wouldn't be a big deal. After all, after a few decades, these people would become a pile of soil and wouldn't be a threat anymore. Hearing the orders of Jiang Taishan and the other three, the disciples of the Night Ghost Pavilion and Evil Sky Palace were all stunned. The people of the 5 great sects did not hold back and crippled their cultivations one by one. The aftermath of the battle was carried out in an orderly manner. The people of the 5 great sects directly moved into the Night Ghost Pavilion. Now that the battle was over, it was time to distribute the spoils. The distribution of the spoils had nothing to do with the 10,000 Beast Valley. After all, when they first formed the alliance, the 10,000 Beast Valley had already reached an agreement with the Sacred Palace and the other 4 sects that they wouldn't take any resources from the Night Ghost Pavilion or the demonic Sky Palace. They only wanted a promise from the Sacred Palace. The 4 sects naturally couldn't divide the resources of the Night Ghost Pavilion and the demonic Sky Palace in a short period of time. Before the distribution, they first had to send people to investigate how many resources the 2 sects had. Therefore, the 5 great sects sent a group of people to the demonic Sky Palace on the same day. A total of 8 quasi-saint great venerables led the group, including the number 1 great venerate of the 10,000 Beast Valley, the Lion sect. This was to guard against any sudden attacks from Wan Shan and the others. The distribution of the spoils would take some time. During this time, everyone would have to stay in the Night Ghost Pavilion. As the number 1 holy son of the Night Ghost Pavilion, Xiaochen was naturally assigned a courtyard to stay temporarily. At the same time, the other holy sons of the 5 great sects received the same treatment. 3 days had passed since the end of the battle. The post-battle security was more or less done. The disciples and experts of the 2 great sects had their cultivations crippled and were sent to the most remote place in the North Star world. They were left to fend for themselves. Xiaochen wasn't worried about the Night Ghost Pavilion and the demonic Sky Palace's disciples, nor did he pay much attention to them. On this day, Xiaochen, Qin Shuru, the 4 girls, and the other holy sons and holy daughters of the Sacred Palace sat together. The battle was finally over. It was rare for everyone to be able to relax as they drank and chatted. At this moment, Bai took a sip of wine and said in a relaxed manner, "It's finally over. The North Star world should be able to enjoy some peace for a while." "Yes, but we can't relax. There is still a gap in strength between us and the holy sons and holy daughters of the other sections. We have to make up for it as soon as possible. We can't always let senior brother Xiaochen and the others handle everything. We are also holy sons and holy daughters of the Sacred Palace," said the 9th holy daughter, Yunchuan. Compared to the holy sons and holy daughters of the other 4 great quasi-sage sects, apart from Xiaochen, Chenling, Longqing, and Qinyu, there was indeed a gap in strength between the holy sons and holy daughters of the Sacred Palace. This gap had to be made up for as soon as possible. No one objected to Yunchuan's words. Only the Azure Emperor said indifferently, "Junior sister Yun is right. However, after this battle, the Sacred Palace should have a secret realm. When that time comes, as long as we have time, I believe that the holy sons of the Sacred Palace won't be inferior to any of the other sections." At the end of the day, the holy sons and holy daughters of the Sacred Palace were weak because of their lack of foundation. It wasn't just their personal foundation that was lacking, but the Sacred Palace's foundation was also lacking because the Sacred Palace had no heritage. If the Sacred Palace's foundation could reach the level of the other quasi-sage sects, the Azure Emperor and the others would definitely be able to catch up with the holy sons and holy daughters of the other sections. In the past, they didn't have this qualification. However, after this battle, the Sacred Palace would definitely have its own secret realm. Everyone was overjoyed when they heard the Azure Emperor's words. A secret realm was what the Sacred Palace needed the most now. However, unlike everyone else, Xiaochen didn't look too happy. This was because Xiaochen knew very well that the process of distributing the benefits wouldn't be that simple. They used to have a common enemy. Now that the Night Ghost Pavilion and the Evil Sky Palace had been destroyed, there were no longer any threats. Naturally, there would be conflicts. Unfortunately, the Sacred Palace was now in a weaker position, especially when it came to the Quasi-Saint Supreme Venerables. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1201. Originally, the alliance of the 5 great sects was driven by benefits. Previously, there was still the external threat of the Night Ghost Pavilion and the Evil Sky Palace. However, now that the Night Ghost Pavilion and the Evil Sky Palace had been declared dead, there was no external threat. At the same time, there was also the distribution of benefits. This matter would not be simple. Birds die in pursuit of food and men die in pursuit of wealth. Therefore, it was not certain whether the Sacred Palace would be able to obtain a relatively fair share of benefits this time. After all, there was indeed a huge gap between the Sacred Palace and the other 4 great sects at the quasi-saint level. Jiang Taishan, Tianju, Mangu, and Shirzong were all existences at the great circle of the quasi-saint stage. On the other hand, the strongest person in the Sacred Palace, Xiaosheng, was only at the initial quasi-saint stage. If their strength was not equal, they would naturally be bullied. Xiaochen was not optimistic about the distribution of benefits this time, but it was not as if there was no solution, and this solution naturally lay with Tianyu and Longqing. One of them was the number 1 holy girl of the 9 heavens, while the other was a pure-blooded dragon. For the 9 heavens and the Thousand Beast Valley, Tianyu and Longqing's words could not be ignored. Therefore, if they could reach some kind of agreement with the 2 holy girls in the Thousand Beast Valley, with the help of these 2 great sects, the Sacred Palace would not suffer too much in the distribution of benefits. However, the Thousand Beast Valley would be fine. After all, they would not participate in the distribution of benefits between the Night Ghost Pavilion and the Evil Sky Palace. In addition, with Longqing's persuasion, the Thousand Beast Valley would very likely agree, but the same could not be said for the 9 heavens. The reason was very simple. The 9 heavens also had to consider their own benefits. If the Sacred Palace got a bigger share, the 9 heavens would naturally get less benefits. After all, there was only so much of the pie. The 9 heavens might be a little difficult to deal with, but it was not impossible. Everything still depended on Tianyu's status in the hearts of the 9 heavens' supreme sovereigns. If Tianyu's status was high enough, the 9 heavens' supreme sovereigns might consider giving up a portion of the benefits to the Sacred Palace. However, Xiaochen obviously wouldn't say these words out loud. He could only take some time to discuss it with Tianyu and Longqing. At the same time, he also had to tell Xiaosheng and the other 3 about his thoughts. Everyone was discussing the division of benefits. At the same time, they all felt that there shouldn't be any major battles in the North Star realm for a long time. They should be able to maintain peace for a period of time. However, no one had expected that such peace would not last long. Of course, this was no longer something that they could control. Even Jiang Taishan, who was at the great perfection of the quasi-saint realm, could not control it because such chaos did not originate from within the North Star domain. While everyone was chatting and drinking, far away from the North Star realm, on an incomparably huge continent. In terms of size, this continent was at least 5 or 6 times larger than the entire North Star realm. A continent that was 5 or 6 times larger than the entire North Star realm. What kind of concept was this? One must know that the North Star realm's surface area included the endless starry sky. The total surface area of the various continents of the North Star realm was probably not even 1/10 of the total surface area of the North Star realm. However, even so, the surface area of this continent was still 5 to 6 times the total area of the North Star boundary. One could imagine just how big this continent was. It was simply so big that it made one's hair stand on end. At the same time, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth on this continent was also extremely dense. It was practically comparable to some low-level cultivation secret realms. At this time, in a mountain range on this continent, a group of youths had gathered by a vast lake. If Xiaochen was here, he would definitely recognize these people. These people were the elite disciples of the Night Ghost Pavilion, and Mo was among them. They had escaped from the North Star Realm's horizon and experienced countless dangers along the way before finally arriving on this continent. Many people had died along the way, including 3 chosen. Now, of the 6 chosen of the Night Ghost Pavilion, only Mo, Hao Zong, and Gu Chang'e were still alive. As for the other disciples, nearly 80% of them had died. Nearly 1,000 people had passed through the horizon together, but now, less than 100 people had safely arrived on this continent. Mo's eyes were overflowing with killing intent as he looked at the Night Ghost Pavilion's less than 100 disciples before him. Xiaochen, Sacred Palace, just you wait. One day, I will slaughter my way back to the North Star Realm and make you all regret this. Mo was still thinking about slaughtering his way back to the North Star Realm, but this wish of his was destined to never come true. At the center of this continent, on a towering mountain peak that pierced through the clouds, there was a large hall at the top of the mountain. This hall looked like it had just been built, and dozens of figures were currently sitting cross-legged in the hall. The owners of these figures came from different clans. There were humans, beasts, ghosts, deities, barbarians, and even many other clans that did not exist in the North Star Realm. It was already shocking that so many powerhouses from different clans had gathered in one place. However, what was even more shocking was that the dozens of figures in this hall were all Great Sage Realm cultivations without exception. Dozens of the Great Sage were almost legendary existences in the North Star Realm. At this moment, there were dozens of them gathered in this small hall. The hall was a little dim. At this moment, the Great Sage of the Sacred Clan said faintly, "There has been a lot of activity recently. It seems that the prophecy is really about to come true. After being together for a long time, they will part, and after being apart for a long time, they will come back together." It seems like that is indeed the case, a great saint from the Ghost Clan said softly when he heard that. If this day comes, it will be chaos. I'm afraid the Central World will experience another great purge. This is very normal, and we can't stop it. I think we can start preparing. This is the will of the heavens, and no one can defy it. Moreover, this may not be a bad thing for our 100 clans. That's right. Anyway, we have been fighting for so many years. It's meaningless to fight on a small scale. Since the will of the heavens wants the 100 clan war to break out, then let's leave it to fate. I wonder who will become the king of the 100 clans this time. The dozens of the Great Sage spoke one after another. No one knew what they were talking about, but from their words, this continent seemed to be called the Central World. Moreover, something big was about to happen, and it could not be stopped. North Star Realm, South Star Realm, East Star Realm, West Star Realm, 4 Great Star Realms, plus the Central World. It seems that this is really interesting. After some discussion, the Great Sage of the Human Clan chuckled softly. Seeking collection, seeking monthly votes, seeking recommendation. Chapter 1202. The Great Sage's words were incomprehensible to outsiders, but the North Star Boundary, South Star Boundary, East Star Boundary, West Star Boundary, and the Central World that the human race Great Sage mentioned at the end made some guesses. But even if he had guessed this, he was still confused. But no matter what, this continent that was 5 or 6 times larger than the entire North Star Realm, which was also the so-called Central World, was indeed ridiculously strong. The Great Sage, who was already known as a legend in the North Star Boundary, was actually gathered in a small hall here. What kind of concept was this? It should be known that any one of the dozens of the Great Sage present was enough to destroy the North Star Boundary. Even if all the quasi-sage great sovereigns in the North Star Boundary joined forces, they would still not be a match for one the Great Sage, not to mention that there were even more half-step great saints and quasi-sage great sovereigns under the Great Sage. This was simply terrifying to the extreme. Of course, Xiaochen and the others knew nothing about the Central World, let alone the unstoppable thing that the Great Sage was talking about in the so-called 100 Race War. At this time, Xiaochen and the others were still staying in the Night Ghost Pavilion. Half a month had passed since the battle. During this time, the various industries and resources under the Night Ghost Pavilion and the Evil Sky Palace had been accounted for one by one. Now, it was time to divide the benefits. Because he had long expected that the division of benefits this time would not be very smooth, Xiaochen had already told Xiao Sheng and the others his thoughts during this period. Xiao Sheng and the others naturally agreed with this. Therefore, Long Qing and Tian Yu went to visit the quasi-sage great sovereigns of the Valley of Beasts and Ninth Heaven respectively. Just as Xiaochen had expected, the Valley of Beasts agreed to help the Sacred Palace without much effort, allowing the Sacred Palace to obtain a relatively equal division of benefits. It was not strange for the Myriad Beasts Valley to be so straightforward. After all, the Myriad Beasts Valley did not participate in the distribution of benefits between the Night Ghost Pavilion and the Evil Sky Palace. Therefore, the Myriad Beasts Valley did not care who received more and who received less. In addition, Long Qing had personally visited them and made some other promises. Naturally, the Wan Beasts Valley was willing to help. After all, there was no loss for the Wan Beasts Valley. The 10,000 Beasts Valley agreed, but just the 10,000 Beasts Valley alone wasn't enough. They still needed to see what Nine Heavens wanted. Compared to the Myriad Beasts Valley, Nine Heavens was a bit more difficult to deal with. Even if Tian Yu personally asked, Tian Ju and the other two great sovereigns of Nine Heavens didn't immediately agree. The reason was very simple. The Sacred Palace wanted a bigger share of the benefits. As a result, Nine Heavens' interests would naturally be infringed. Although it wasn't much, it wasn't something Nine Heavens was happy to see. Nine Heavens was hesitant. In the end, Xiaochen and Tian Yu visited them together. After an entire day of discussion, Nine Heavens finally agreed. They reached an agreement with Nine Heavens. Nine Heavens in the Myriad Beasts Valley would help the Sacred Palace obtain at least 2 secret zones. However, Nine Heavens had a condition. For the next 100 years, the Sacred Palace had to unconditionally give Nine Heavens 3 spots to cultivate in these secret zones every year. To put it bluntly, Nine Heavens would help the Sacred Palace obtain at least 2 secret zones. However, these secret zones would be shared by both the Sacred Palace and Nine Heavens for the next 100 years. Nine Heavens would have 3 spots every year. The Sacred Palace did not refuse Nine Heavens' request. It wasn't that they didn't want to refuse, but that they couldn't. After successfully persuading Nine Heavens and the Myriad Beasts Valley, the members of the 5 great sects finally gathered to discuss the division of benefits between the Night Ghost Pavilion and the Evil Sky Hall. Xiaochen naturally didn't have the qualifications to participate in a meeting of this level. However, Xiaochen wasn't too worried about the outcome because he had already made sufficient preparations. With Nine Heavens and the Myriad Beasts Valley's help, he believed the Supreme Divine Sect and Li Wang's sect would know what to choose. Xiaochen leaned lazily on a bamboo chair in the courtyard with Tian Yu by his side. Seeing how calm Xiaochen was, Gu Lingyao asked curiously. "Husband, aren't you worried at all when the 5 great sects' great sovereigns are discussing the division of benefits today? What's there to worry about? I've already done what I can. All that's left is to wait for the results," Xiaochen chuckled softly. Xiaochen had already done what he could, and the rest was not something he should worry about. While Xiaochen was acting nonchalant, the great sovereigns of the 5 great sects had already gathered in the main hall of the Night Ghost Pavilion. Of course, the leaders were still Jiang Taishan, Tian Ju, Huang Gu, and Lion Sect. The 4 of them sat at the head of the table, while the other great sovereigns sat on the sides below. Although they were the 5 great sects, Xiao Sheng and the other 3 from the Sacred Palace were not on the same level as Jiang Taishan and the other 3. There were no Sacred Palace seats on the head of the table, which was a clear indication of the Sacred Palace's weakness. At the same time, Jiang Taishan was the first to speak. He first glanced at Lion Sect and smiled. "Lion Sect, I thought you wouldn't come." After all, the Myriad Beasts Valley doesn't seem to be interested in the Night Ghost Pavilion and the Evil Sky Hall. Lion Sect didn't need to come at all. After all, the division of benefits this time had nothing to do with the Myriad Beasts Valley. Lion Sect smiled faintly when he heard Jiang Taishan's words. I'm just here to join in the fun. Lion Sect was only here to join in the fun, so Jiang Taishan didn't say anything else. He turned his gaze to the great sovereigns below. Jiang Taishan said indifferently. After half a month of inventory, we've found out the properties and resources of the Night Ghost Pavilion and the Evil Sky Hall. There are 4 foundation secret realms, 18 secret realms for cultivation, 180 spirit veins, 8 of which are supreme-grade spirit veins. As for the pills, talismans, and other things, I won't go into detail. There are a lot of them. Let's discuss the distribution of these things now. Jiang Taishan said calmly. As soon as he finished speaking, a great sovereign from the Liwang sect stood up and said, let's make things clear first. Before the distribution, I think we should make things clear first. This time, the distribution should be based on how much effort you put in. Only then will it be fair. Otherwise, it will be unfair to everyone. Distribute according to how much effort you put in. Everyone looked at Xiao Sheng and the other 3. These words were clearly directed at the Sacred Palace. After all, there was no one in the Sacred Palace who was at the great perfection of the Quasi-Saint realm. Moreover, Xiao Sheng and the other 3 were the weakest in the Quasi-Saint realm. Only Xiao Sheng was at the lesser completion of the Quasi-Saint realm. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendation. Chapter 1203. It was precisely because the Sacred Palace didn't have the slightest advantage at the level of Quasi-Saint Great Venerates that they were so passive in today's meeting that was completely composed of Quasi-Saint Great Venerates. In fact, they had been overshadowed the moment they arrived. According to the Great Sovereign, the Sacred Palace should have contributed the least, so the Sacred Palace should have received the least benefits. That's right, those who put in more effort should get a bigger share. Otherwise, it wouldn't be fair, the other Supreme Sovereign chimed in. I also agree. A third Great Sovereign chimed in. One after another, Quasi-Saint Great Sovereigns chimed in. Of course, these people were all from the Supreme Deity sect and Liwang sect. 9 Heavens and the Myriad Beast Valley had already reached an agreement with the Sacred Palace, so they naturally wouldn't add insult to injury. In the face of these great sovereigns' insistence on fairness, Xiao Sheng and the other 3 remained calm and composed. Their faces didn't change in the slightest, nor did they refute, as if none of this had anything to do with them. Seeing that Xiao Sheng and the other 3 had no intention of speaking, the great sovereign's eyes flashed with confusion. What was the Sacred Palace Great Sovereign doing? Could it be that they didn't understand the meaning behind his words? Xiao Sheng and the other 3 remained silent. In the end, the first Great Sovereign to speak looked directly at Xiao Sheng. Brother Xiao Sheng, does the Sacred Palace think we're right? Since Xiao Sheng and the other 3 remained silent, they had no choice but to make things clear. Xiao Sheng looked indifferently at the Great Sovereign and said calmly. What does it mean to contribute the most, and what does it mean to contribute the least? This naturally depends on the strength of each side. The stronger side will naturally contribute more, and the weaker side will naturally contribute less. The Great Sovereign chuckled. It was obvious that the Sacred Palace was the weakest among the 5 great sects, especially in the Quasi-Saint Great Venerate realm. Xiao Sheng smiled when he heard this. In that case, does everyone think that my Sacred Palace contributed the least in this battle? Since they had already come to this point, there was no harm in getting straight to the point. Therefore, Xiao Sheng did not beat around the bush and spoke very directly. Xiao Chen asked straightforwardly. Upon hearing this, the Supreme Venerate replied with a smile on his face. I don't think there's a need for me to say this. Everyone present should have seen that the Sacred Palace has indeed contributed the least in this battle. After all, your Sacred Palace did not contribute at all to Kugui and Wanshan. However, since we are allies, we will naturally not treat the Sacred Palace unfairly. I believe that the benefits that should be given to the Sacred Palace will not be small. What do you say, Brother Xiao Sheng? The meaning was very clear. Xiaoxing said indifferently. In that case, let's see what the four great sovereigns think. I believe that the four great sovereigns will be very fair. Xiaoxing could not be bothered to waste his breath on this person. Since he was already prepared, he would directly throw the matter to Jiang Taishan and the other three. Moreover, when he said this, Xiaoxing deliberately included the lion sect. The Myriad Beast Valley originally did not want to participate in the distribution of benefits this time. Now that Xiaoxing had said this, it was obvious that the lion sect was also included and the four of them would decide. Unaware of the hidden meaning in Xiaoxing's words, the great sovereigns present all looked towards Jiang Taishan and the other three. Xiaoxing was right. Although the distribution of benefits this time seemed to be decided by the great sovereigns present, in reality, only Jiang Taishan and the other three had the right to decide. It was also because of this that the Sacred Palace was in such a passive position. The Sacred Palace did not have people at the level of Jiang Taishan, so they naturally did not have the right to speak and could only follow the arrangements of others. As expected, Jiang Taishan calmly said under everyone's gazes. Everyone is right and very reasonable. However, I feel that since we are all allies, we should advance and retreat together. Although the Sacred Palace did not contribute much in this battle, they have worked hard even if they did not contribute much. Therefore, the benefits that should be divided will not be small. Jiang Taishan paused as his gaze fell on Xiaoxing and the other three. After pausing for a moment, Jiang Taishan continued. How about this? The Sacred Palace will get 1 supreme-grade spirit vein and 10 mid-grade spirit veins from the Night Ghost Pavilion and the Evil Sky Hall. As for the pills and talismans, they will all be given to the Sacred Palace. After all, we are all allies and there are some things that do not need to be so clearly divided. Xiaoxing, Randang, Bing Lian, and Mingxie's eyes flashed with anger when they heard Jiang Taishan's words. As for the great sovereigns of the Supreme Deity sect and Liwang sect, they all cupped their hands together and said, We agree with the great sovereign's benevolence. The great sovereigns all agreed with Jiang Taishan's words. Moreover, from their expressions, they seemed to think that Jiang Taishan was being very benevolent and that the Sacred Palace was benefiting greatly. However, even Ming Yan could tell that Jiang Taishan's allocation was blatant bullying. He had directly skipped the distribution of benefits for the other three great sects and directly decided on the Sacred Palace's share. Moreover, from beginning to end, Jiang Taishan had not mentioned a single secret realm or secret cultivation area. In other words, the various industries and cultivation resources of the Night Ghost Pavilion and the Evil Sky Hall could not be obtained by the Sacred Palace, let alone secret realms. They did not even have a single secret cultivation area. The Night Ghost Pavilion and the Evil Sky Hall had a total of 4 secret realms and 18 secret cultivation areas. However, these did not seem to have anything to do with the Sacred Palace. As for the so-called supreme-grade spirit veins, pills, and talismans, they were not of much use at all. It seemed very generous of him to give all the pills and talismans of the 2 great sects to the Sacred Palace, but everyone present knew that these things were of little value. This was because pills and talismans could be refined by oneself, but secret realms and secret cultivation areas were the foundation of a sect's development. Without secret realms and secret cultivation areas, a sect could not develop at all. Relying on pills and talismans alone? That was simply a fool's dream. They had originally thought that no matter how greedy Jiang Taishan and the others were, they wouldn't give any secret zones to the Sacred Palace, but they should at least have cultivation secret zones. Who would have thought that Jiang Taishan wouldn't even give any secret zones to the Sacred Palace, as if the Sacred Palace couldn't do anything about it? It was no wonder that Xiaoxing and the others were furious. After working so hard for so long, they did not even get to eat the scraps and only drank the soup. Anyone would be furious if they were in Jiang Taishan's shoes. Therefore, Randang also said in a low voice, Isn't the great sovereign's actions a little too much? Please add, please vote, please recommend. Chapter 1204. Jiang Taishan's actions were indeed too much. Just because the Sacred Palace was weak and didn't have a perfect quasi-saint expert, Jiang Taishan was bullying them like this. Normally speaking, even if the sacred palace was weak and didn't have a perfect quasi-saint expert, the sacred palace didn't have the qualifications to claim secret areas. But no matter what, the sacred palace should have a share of the 18 cultivation secret areas. But now, Jiang Taishan wasn't even willing to give the sacred palace a share of the 18 secret areas, and not even a single one. Because of the anger in his heart, Ronding's tone became very stiff even in front of Jiang Taishan. A cold glint flashed across Jiang Taishan's eyes when he heard Ronding's words. However, at his level, he was able to conceal his emotions. Jiang Taishan didn't lose his temper, but instead, a supreme sovereign of the supreme sovereigns spoke up in a similarly cold tone. Randang, watch your tone. Your sacred palace didn't contribute much this time. What, do you think it's too little for the supreme sovereign to distribute it like this? Someone naturally stood up for Jiang Taishan before he even spoke up. Hearing this person's words, the masters present all had different expressions. The people of the Thousand Beasts Valley didn't care about the matter, while the people of the Nine Heavens all sat upright, as if they didn't care about the outside world. The supreme sovereigns of the Thousand Beasts Valley and Nine Heavens didn't speak, and the Liwang sect and supreme sovereign were clearly working together to oppress the sacred palace and reduce the sacred palace's benefits to the minimum. The secret areas and cultivation secret areas couldn't be given to the sacred palace, but the spirit veins, pills, and talismans of little value could be given to the sacred palace. They were completely treating the sacred palace as fools. It was an extremely unreasonable distribution, but from these people's words, it was as if the sacred palace had taken a huge advantage. Another supreme sovereign from the Power King sect chimed in after the supreme sovereign's words. Brother Xiaosheng, there are some things that those who are content with what they have are happy with. Rewards should naturally be distributed according to the size of the contribution. Since the sacred palace contributed the least, the benefits should naturally be the least. Everyone spoke up one after another with the same attitude. Jiang Taishan's distribution was very good and fair, and the sacred palace didn't lose out. As if the sacred palace was already in the bag, the supreme sovereign of the supreme sovereign and Liwang sect were all full of confidence as they looked at Xiaosheng's group of 4. In their opinion, this should be the end of today's matter. After dealing with the sacred palace, the supreme deity sect, Power King sect, and Nine Heavens would split the remaining secret realms and cultivation secret realms. The supreme sovereign of the 3 sects was, and the supreme sovereign of course have a says of the sacred palace. The supreme sovereigns say, what do you think of Xiaosheng? Est of a Liwang of St have the house? Think Teed have halves. TTS of S. If it's reasonable, then it's settled. Our 3 sects will discuss the next division later. Jiang Taishan's words were clearly a reminder to Tianju. His meaning was obvious. As long as Tianju nodded, Jiang Taishan would directly send the sacred palace away, and the remaining things would be divided among the 3 sections. In Jiang Taishan's opinion, Tianju definitely wouldn't refuse, and the supreme sovereigns below also thought the same. However, to everyone's surprise, Tianju indifferently spoke up after Jiang Taishan's voice faded. I don't think it's very fair. The sacred palace has contributed a lot, and this kind of distribution isn't appropriate. The sacred palace should have some secret areas and secret cultivation areas, but the sacred palace didn't get anything, and those pills and talismans can be said to be useless. Therefore, I think we should reconsider. This simple sentence stunned the quasi-saint supreme sovereign of the supreme sovereign and Liwang sect. Even Jiang Taishan was taken aback for a moment before looking at Tianju with a puzzled expression. What did this mean? Tianju was actually opposing them. Didn't he know that the 3 sects would only be able to obtain more benefits after sending the sacred palace away? Everyone originally thought that they had the sacred palace in their grasp and that this time, the sacred palace could only suffer in silence. But who would have thought that Tianju would actually say such a thing at this time? It was simply unexpected. Jiang Taishan was puzzled, but he soon guessed something and unconsciously glanced at Xiaosheng and the others. Tianju's words at this time clearly indicated that he was on the sacred palace's side. In this case, there was only one explanation, and that was that 9 heavens and the sacred palace had reached some kind of agreement. 9 heavens would stand on the sacred palace's side in the division of benefits. Thinking of this, Jiang Taishan suddenly had a bad premonition and turned to look at Lion Sect. Since the sacred palace and 9 heavens had reached some kind of agreement, then wouldn't the Myriad Beast Valley be even simpler? After all, the Myriad Beast Valley wasn't participating in the division of benefits this time, so it wouldn't be difficult for the sacred palace to win over the Myriad Beast Valley. Having already expected this, Lion Sect also laughed heartily in response to Jiang Taishan's gaze. This matter originally had nothing to do with my Myriad Beast Valley, but since I'm here, I naturally have something to say. We're all allies and have fought side by side before, so we can't go too far. The division must be fair. Don't you agree, Brother Jiang? Jiang Taishan's eyes narrowed slightly when he heard Lion Sect's words. As I thought. The development of the situation was somewhat unexpected. He originally thought that the sacred palace had no power to resist and could only accept it, but at this moment, it seemed that they were no longer in control. Tianju and Lion Sect spoke out one after another, all of them speaking up for the sacred palace. As such, Jiang Taishan naturally couldn't be stubborn. After all, Tianju and Lion Sect weren't afraid of Jiang Taishan. Falling into silence, Huanggu also fell into deep thought. He originally thought that it would be very easy to get rid of the sacred palace, but now it seemed that it would be a little difficult. Jiang Taishan was indeed a shrewd old man. After only a moment of silence, Jiang Taishan opened his mouth to speak. There was still a spring breeze-like smile on his face, as if he wasn't affected by Tianju and Lion Sect's words at all. Jiang Taishan looked towards Xiaosheng and said with a smile, since everyone disagrees with the division just now, let's discuss it again. We're all allies, so it's very normal to have disagreements. Brother Xiaosheng, how about this? Why don't the sacred palace decide what division you think is fair? Begging for your collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. If you want to chat about Sword Master of 8 Desolations with more like-minded people, follow Excellent Literature on WeChat. Chat about life, find a confidant. Chapter 1205. Jiang Taishan took the initiative to ask for Xiaosheng's opinion. This was something that no one had ever thought of before. Of course, it was also because Tianju and the Lion Sect had spoken. With these two around, Jiang Taishan naturally could not continue to be stubborn. Hearing Jiang Taishan's words, Xiaosheng only said one sentence. As long as it's fair. He did not specify how the distribution would be done, as long as it was fair. Xiaosheng's words put Jiang Taishan in a difficult position. Jiang Taishan was also unable to deal with the current situation, but Tianju took the initiative to speak up. How about this? The Liwang sect and the Supreme God sect will each have one, while the Sacred Palace will have 2. As for 9 heavens, we won't need it. After all, the alliance this time was initiated by the Sacred Palace. Moreover, the Sacred Palace is newly established and is in great need of secret zones, so we'll let them have 2 secret zones. As for cultivation secret zones, the 3 of us will each have 5, while the Sacred Palace will have 3. As for the other spirit veins, properties, pills, talismans and so on, we'll divide them equally. What does Brother Jiang think? Tianju took the initiative to speak. Jiang Taishan was clearly taken aback. This wasn't because Tianju's allocation wasn't fair enough. On the contrary, it was very fair. However, Jiang Taishan hadn't expected that Tianju would give up a secret domain of his own accord and give it to the Sacred Palace. The fairest distribution of the 4 secret zones was naturally one for each of the 4 great sections. But now, the Supreme God sect and the Liwang sect each had a secret zone of their own, but 9 heavens had given it up and given it to the Sacred Palace. Jiang Taishan had not expected this at all. Of course, he clearly did not know the conditions of the Sacred Palace and 9 heavens. According to the agreement between the 2 sides, 9 heavens could send people to cultivate in these 2 secret zones for the next 100 years. Therefore, it was not a loss for 9 heavens. However, Tianju naturally could not tell Jiang Taishan about this. Tianju looked at Jiang Taishan with a slight smile and waited for his reply. It was only after a long while that Jiang Taishan revealed a somewhat unnatural smile. Brother Tianju, you're really surprising. Is 9 heavens really willing to give up on a secret realm? Since we are allies, we naturally have to help each other. What do you think of my proposal, Brother Jiang? Tianju smiled indifferently. 9th heaven was determined to give him an inheritance. Hearing this, Jiang Taishan looked at the ancient desolate and lion sect and asked, what do you two think? Although the Myriad Beasts Valley wasn't participating in the distribution of benefits this time, Jiang Taishan obviously couldn't ignore the lion sect. Hearing Jiang Taishan's words, Lion Sect was the first to speak with a smile. I feel that Brother Tianju's suggestion is not bad. After all, it's 9 heavens' business to give up on their own accord. There's no loss to the Supreme Deity Sect and Liwang Sect. Don't you think so, Brother Huanggu? The Lion Sect would definitely agree, and what he said was also correct. 9 heavens was willing to give up an inheritance to the Saint Palace, but that was their business. It had nothing to do with the Supreme Deity Sect or the Power King Sect. There were a total of 4 inheritances. Putting aside the Myriad Beasts Valley, the fairest distribution method was naturally the Supreme Deity Sect, Liwang Sect, 9 heavens, and the Sacred Palace. Now that the Supreme Deity Sect and Liwang Sect had each been given an inheritance, there was nothing wrong with 9 heavens giving their quota to the Sacred Palace. A strange look flashed across the ancient desolate's eyes. There was no problem with Tianju's distribution plan. The 4 great sects would all receive the most fair distribution. At the same time, the ancient desolate could accept such a result. It would naturally be better if they could obtain more benefits, but looking at the current situation, it might be a little difficult. 9 heavens and the Myriad Beasts Valley had made it clear that they were determined to advance and retreat together with the Sacred Palace. If things became too stiff, it would not end well. Thinking of this, the ancient desolate did not act rashly and smiled faintly. Since the Lion Sect agrees, I also agree with Brother Tianju. Both the Lion Sect and the ancient desolate had agreed to Tianju's proposal. Jiang Taishan actually had no other choice, but he still asked Xiaosheng. Brother Xiaosheng, what does the Sacred Palace think? We naturally have no objections. Xiaosheng indifferently replied. The Sacred Palace naturally had no objections to such a distribution. Although the 2 heritage inheritances had to give 3 places to 9 heavens every year, and the Sacred Palace was only given 3 cultivation secret realms, while the Supreme Deity Sect and the other 2 sects were given 5 each, this was already the best result. At least, it was much better than Xiaosheng and the others had expected. Xiaosheng also nodded in agreement. Although Jiang Taishan was a little unhappy, he did not show it on his face and smiled at the various great sovereigns present. In that case, we will distribute according to Brother Tianju's proposal. In the following time, the various sects should prepare to receive their share of the benefits. The situation was completely out of Jiang Taishan's expectations. He no longer had much interest in the matter, and after a few casual words, the crowd dispersed. The distribution of benefits between the Night Ghost Pavilion and the Evil Sky Hall had been decided, and the result was naturally eye-popping. Without knowing the inside story, the Sacred Palace was undoubtedly the biggest winner this time. Although the Sacred Palace had 2 fewer cultivation secret realms than the other 3 great sects, they had 1 more heritage secret realm. The value of a heritage secret realm was obviously not something that 2 cultivation secret realms could compare to. Therefore, the Sacred Palace was undoubtedly the biggest winner this time. The disciples of the 4 great sects were all extremely puzzled because they had not expected such a result. On the other hand, Xiaochen, who was in his residence, was very calm when he heard the news. He was not surprised at all by the result. Seeing Xiaochen so calm, the Azure Emperor, Bai, and the other Sacred Palace chosen who had rushed over after hearing the news looked at Xiaochen strangely. Senior Brother Xiaochen, aren't you excited at all? Our sacred palace is the biggest winner this time. Xiao Chen's performance was simply too calm, which puzzled everyone. Hearing this, Xiao Chen smiled faintly and said, "That's right. I already expected this result." Everything had been planned by Xiao Chen. With the help of the Thousand Beasts Valley and Nine Heavens, this result was naturally not surprising. However, the only flaw was that in order to persuade Nine Heavens, the Sacred Palace had also made a promise. Although the two heritage secret realms seemed to belong to the Sacred Palace, half of them still belonged to Nine Heavens. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendation. Chapter 1206. The two secret zones seemed to belong solely to the Sacred Palace, but Nine Heavens still wanted a share of the profits. It was because of this that Nine Heavens had chosen to give one of its secret zones to the Sacred Palace. Of course, no matter what, this was already the best outcome for the Sacred Palace. With these two secret zones, the Sacred Palace's foundation could grow rapidly, which was what the Sacred Palace needed the most right now. As for some small losses, there was nothing they could do about it. After all, the Sacred Palace was weak. It was good that others could help you with many things, but in the end, it all depended on you. For example, if the Sacred Palace had a supreme sovereign at the perfect stage of the quasi-saint stage, there would be no need for them to ally with Nine Heavens and the Myriad Beast Valley. The Sacred Palace alone would be enough to deal with these matters. They were still weaker, so some losses were necessary. After all, Nine Heavens wouldn't help them for no reason. There was no need to fuss over these matters. The day after the meeting, Xiao Chen and the other Sacred Palace chosen returned to the Sacred Palace. As for Xiao Sheng and the other patriarchs, as well as the Sacred Palace Saint Sovereigns, they were going to the Night Ghost Pavilion in Nine Heavens to receive the benefits. These benefits could allow the Sacred Palace to rise to a higher level in a short period of time. If it weren't for these benefits, the 5 great sects wouldn't have joined forces to destroy the Night Ghost Pavilion and Demonic Sky Palace. After a round of selection, the Sacred Palace finally chose 2 secret domains. They were the Night Ghost Pavilion's Ghost Realm and the Demonic Sky Palace's Black Demon Mountain. These 2 heritage places were the most effective for the human race, so Xiao Chen naturally chose these 2 secret realms. The Ghost Realm was relatively all-round. It was helpful for the cultivation of the physical body, cultivation, and martial skills. It could be said to be a secret domain without any obvious flaws. As for the Black Demon Mountain, its greatest use was to help people improve their cultivation. This was something the Sacred Palace urgently needed. The 2 secret domains and 3 cultivation secret domains would be personally moved to the Sacred Palace by Xiao Sheng and the others. From now on, they would be the Sacred Palace's cultivation secret domains for the many disciples to cultivate in. Since they didn't need to care about these matters, Xiao Chen and the others naturally returned to the Sacred Palace first. Everyone was in a good mood when they returned to the Sacred Palace. After this battle, the Night Ghost Pavilion and the Evil Sky Palace had been destroyed, and the power structure of the North Star boundary had changed drastically. The Sacred Palace could be considered as a true powerhouse in the North Star boundary. At the same time, the benefits they had gained from this battle filled everyone with hope for the Sacred Palace's future. The spaceship slowly entered the Holy Region and stopped at the main square. Xiao Chen and the rest disembarked and parted ways. Xiao Chen brought Tianyu, Qinshuru, and the other 2 girls back to his cave abode. After resting for more than 2 hours and washing up, Xiao Chen brought the 4 girls to the courtyard where Bai Ruyue and Xiao Qing lived. The 2 elders naturally heaved a sigh of relief when they saw that everyone was safe. The 2 elders were naturally worried about everyone's safety during the fierce battle with the Night Ghost Pavilion and the Evil Sky Palace. However, everything was fine now. Xiao Chen had returned safely, and the 4 girls were not in any danger. That night, Xiao Chen accompanied the 2 elders for a meal. Of course, Chenling and Long Qing also came. However, Xiao Chen felt that Chenling was a little strange today. When they were drinking, he was always absent-minded. There were a few times when he was distracted and didn't even respond when Xiao Chen called him. Sensing Qianling's strangeness, the group bid farewell to the two elders after they were full. Just as Qianling and Longqing were about to leave, Xiaoqian suddenly called out to them. "Big brother, second sister, wait a moment." "What's wrong, little brother?" Hearing Xiaoqian's words, Longqing asked in a normal manner. Hearing this, Xiaoqian didn't say much. He smiled and said, "We haven't talked alone for a long time. Do you want to come to my place?" He took the initiative to invite the two to his residence. Longqing didn't refuse, and Qianling nodded silently. The group quickly arrived at Xiaoqian's residence. Tianyu and the other girls were very sensible and didn't bother with their own matters. Fei Mei and Lan also respectfully left after making tea for the three of them. Soon, only Xiaoqian and his siblings were left in the front hall. Without any outsiders, Xiaoqian directly asked Qianling, "Big brother, what's wrong with you today? Is there something on your mind?" Qianling was obviously in the wrong today, which was why Xiaoqian invited the two of them here. He wanted to clarify if Qianling had encountered any trouble. If there was trouble, Xiaoqian naturally wouldn't stand by and do nothing. After hearing Xiaoqian's words, Qianling revealed an expression that said, "As expected, you still came to ask." Then, he sighed and said, "Third brother, aren't you very curious about my hometown?" "I am very curious." "What's wrong?" Hearing this, Xiaoqian asked curiously. "Then let me tell you today. My hometown isn't in the North Star realm. It's in the Central World." Previously, Xiaoqian had asked Qianling about his hometown more than once, but unfortunately, Qianling had evaded every time. But today, Qianling actually took the initiative to talk about this matter. Xiaoqian was naturally puzzled, but after hearing Qianling's narration, Xiaoqian also calmed down and listened attentively. Qianling's understanding of this world was clearly much clearer than Xiaoqian's. It could even be said that even Jiang Taishan, Tianju, the primordial, and the Lion sect, the number one great sovereigns, didn't understand this world as well as Qianling. The simplest thing was that they didn't know anything beyond the North Star realm. According to Qianling, this world had a total of 4 star realms, which were the North Star realm, the South Star realm, the East Star realm, and the West Star realm. In addition to these 4 star realms, there was also the Central World located in the center of these 4 star realms. The 4 star realms were about the same size, and they were separated into 4 sides of the Central World. At the end of each star realm was a layer of restriction known as the horizon limit. The horizon limit was set up by the heavenly Tao in order to stabilize the space of the 4 star realms. Therefore, experts above the Saint realm were unable to travel between the 4 star realms through the horizon limit. It was also because of this that the 4 star realms could be said to be completely independent existences. As for the Central World, it was an incomparably huge continent without the so-called endless starry sky. However, such a continent's area exceeded the area of the 4 star realms combined. One continent was larger than the 4 star realms combined. One could imagine how vast such a continent was. And Qianling's hometown, or rather, his home, was in the Central World. Please collect, please vote, please recommend. Chapter 1207. Listening to Qianling's story, this was the first time Xiaoqian had heard about matters outside of the North Star boundary. He remembered that when he first came into contact with the North Star boundary, Xiaoqian had thought that he was a frog at the bottom of a well. This was because compared to the entire North Star boundary, whether it was the heavenly Qin continent or the Tiana continent, they were like a drop in the ocean. In his mind, the North Star boundary could be said to be extremely vast. But now, Qianling was telling him that outside of the North Star boundary, there were 3 other star boundaries, as well as the Central World, which was even more vast than the 4 star boundaries. Qianling's words undoubtedly shocked Xiaoqian to the extreme. At the same time, it overturned all of Xiaoqian's previous knowledge. After briefly introducing the North Star boundary, the South Star boundary, the East Star boundary, the West Star boundary, and the Central World, Qianling did not continue. This was because he needed to give Xiaoqian some time to digest. He took a sip of tea and looked at the stunned Xiaoqian and Longqing. Ling smiled faintly and did not rush the two of them. For the two of them who did not understand the outside world at all, hearing these things for the first time was indeed a huge shock. Now, the two of them needed time to digest these things. After waiting quietly for a while, Chen finally took a deep breath and said, "The 4-star boundaries in the central world. Is this the true appearance of the world we live in?" Whether it was the former heavenly Qin continent, the Tiana continent, or the current North Star boundary, compared to the real world, they were all just a part of it. As he understood this world, Chen became more and more amazed at the profoundness and vastness of this world. However, at the same time as he was shocked, Chen also became more determined to become stronger. This was because only by becoming stronger could he truly understand this world and travel to every place in this world. Think about it, an ordinary person without cultivation would not be able to leave the heavenly Qin continent in his lifetime, let alone the North Star boundary. A cultivator with ordinary talent would only be able to travel in the North Star boundary in his lifetime. Only the true dragons and phoenixes would have the opportunity to step on the stage of this world and meet and compete with various geniuses. After taking a deep breath and whispering softly, Chen looked at Ling and said with a smile, "Big brother, there must be a lot of experts in the central world, right?" "Yes, a lot." Hearing Chen's words, Ling nodded and replied, "There are more great emperors of the great saint realm, not to mention the half-step great saints, quasi-saints, and saints. In the vast central world, there were as many experts as there were clouds. Geniuses were even more numerous. There were more saints and saintesses and saints and saintesses, there were more than 100 saints and saintesses. There were more than 100 of them saints and saintesses. Although the central world was so big, there were only 100 saints and saintesses. The number seemed small, but the saints and saintesses of the central world could not be compared to the saints and saintesses of the 4 major astral realms. The biggest difference between the two was that the saints and saintesses of the 4 major astral realms were selected by their respective sex. However, in the central world, the sex, even the great saint sex, were not qualified to confer the title of saint or saintess. In the central world, there was only one way to become a saint or saintess, and that was to challenge the saint ranking. Only those who left their names on the saint ranking were qualified to become a saint or saintess of the central world. Otherwise, no one would recognize you as a saint or saintess. There were more than 50 saints and sovereigns. After hearing Ling's words, Chen could not help but gasp. This was simply too sensational. There had not been a great saint in the North Star realm for tens of thousands of years. However, there were more than 50 such existences in the central world. Chen was shocked once again, but this time, he quickly came back to his senses. His eyes flashed with a strong sense of excitement. "Big brother, one day, we will go back to the central world, right?" He had a strong yearning for the central world. If he could really go to the center of the world one day, where there were as many experts as there were clouds and saints as there were rain, how delightful would that be? To put it bluntly, the fights in the North Star realm were just small skirmishes. However, the central world was the center of this world, and the experts there were the real leaders of this era. Chen had always yearned to be able to fight with these real geniuses. Ling smiled when he saw that Chen had regained his composure so quickly and was not depressed at all. Instead, he had an eager expression on his face. "Don't worry, we will be able to go there soon. Today, I want to talk to you about something else, not this." What Ling really wanted to say was not this, but Chen and Long Qing did not have much understanding of the outside world. In order to better explain what was going to happen next, Ling had no choice but to briefly introduce the 4 major star realms and the central world to the two of them. Finally, it was time to talk about the main topic. At this time, Ling also straightened his face and his tone was not as calm as before. On the contrary, it became a little dignified. "Actually, what I want to tell you is an ancient prophecy passed down in the central divine realm, or rather, the rules of this world." "Prophecy? Rules?" Hearing this, Chen and Long Qing were both puzzled. In the face of the two's puzzlement, Ling did not keep them in suspense and explained. A long time ago, this world did not have the so-called central world and the four major star realms. At that time, the entire world was an incomparably huge continent, much bigger than the current central world. At that time, the 100 races lived on this continent. However, as the 100 races cultivated, the origin energy between heaven and earth was quickly consumed. That era could be said to be the most glorious era. Not to mention that great saints were everywhere, but the number of great saints among the 100 races was definitely more than 1,000, or even more. It was precisely because of this terrifying consumption that the rules of heaven and earth forcibly separated the original world in order to preserve the origin energy, which resulted in the formation of the central world and the four major star realms. Usually, the five sides did not have much contact, but this forced separation was also the rules of heaven and earth for self-preservation. However, at the same time, after the world was forcibly separated, every few 100,000 years, the four major star realms and the central world would once again merge into one, forming the original appearance of the world. Once again converging into a complete continent, the 100 races would coexist. At the same time, the rules of heaven would also deliberately arrange for the 100 races to attack each other. This was the widely spread 100 race war in the central world. Chapter 1208. After hearing Qianling's words during the 100 race war, Xiaochen and Long Qing fell into deep thought. They had never thought that there would be such a thing. The heavenly Tao rules would split the world into 5 parts. Looking at the two deep in thought, Qianling did not say anything more. In fact, there was one thing that Qianling did not tell the two of them. Every time there was a 100 race war, the victorious race would receive unimaginable benefits. And such benefits were bestowed by the heavenly Tao rules. No one knew why the heavenly Tao rules were like this, but one thing was certain. Any race that received such benefits could at least become a powerful race. For example, the beast race, demon race, god race, ghost race, barbarian race, heaven race, and so on. These races had all won at least 100 race war. Even the human race was the same. However, according to what Qianling knew, the human race had only won once in the 100 race war. The reason why the human race was able to win that time was because an absolutely terrifying figure had appeared in the human race. He was called the human emperor by the world. It was because of his leadership that the human race had won that 100 race war. It was only that one time, but the human race had succeeded in rising. Although the human race was still weak in front of old and powerful races like the god race and demon race, at least they had a certain right to speak and some power to contend with them. These were the benefits of winning the 100 race war. The strongest people of the victorious races would also receive rewards from the heavenly Tao rules. However, without exception, these people who received special rewards from the heavenly Tao rules all mysteriously disappeared in the end. There were rumors that they had broken through to the Great Saint realm and reached an unimaginable level. This world could not withstand their power, so they went to a higher plane. This was only a guess. As for the truth, no one knew. Qianling did not tell Xiaochen and Long Qing about these things. The two of them were still too far away from these things. If they wanted to have the ability to influence the 100 race war, they needed to at least break through to the Great Saint realm. One must know that once the 100 races war broke out, even quasi-saints couldn't be considered top-notch experts. Only those true the great sage had the right to speak and the ability to influence the entire war situation. After pondering for a while, in the end, it was still Xiaochen who recovered first. Looking at Qianling, Xiaochen said softly, "Big brother, you mean that very soon, our 5 worlds will merge together again? When the time comes, we will gather in the central world." "That's right. When the time comes, all the continents of the 4 major astral realms will be forcefully merged into the central world, forming an incomparably huge continent, forming the original appearance of this world. The War of the 100 Clans will begin." Hearing this, Qianling nodded slightly. This was the arrangement of the heavenly Tao, and no one could resist it. In this world, even the great sage did not have the ability to challenge the heavenly Tao. He had learned something incredible from Qianling, and this matter concerned the 4 major astral realms as well as everyone in the central world. No matter if you had cultivation or not, there was no way to avoid it. Taking a deep breath, Xiaoqian finally said, "It's best to tell the 4 patriarchs about this matter as soon as possible so that they can be prepared." Since Qianling knew about this, he should tell Xiao Sheng and the other 4 patriarchs so that the sacred palace could make preparations in advance. Qianling nodded in agreement to Xiao Chen's suggestion. Subsequently, the 3 of them chatted for a while more before going their separate ways. After sending off Qianling and Long Qing, Xiao Chen's eyes flashed with excitement. The War of the 100 Races in the Central World had shocked Xiao Chen, but more than that, he was excited. To be able to stand on the same stage as the true geniuses of the various races who had lived in the Central World since childhood was a huge challenge for Xiao Chen, but at the same time, it was also a huge temptation. In the North Star world, Xiao Chen already stood at the top of the younger generation. Although Xiao Chen could not guarantee 100% victory against the other First Saints, there were not many people in the younger generation who could make Xiao Chen fear. Although Qianling did not say much earlier, Xiao Chen still heard some things. Compared to the saints and saintesses of the 4 major astral realms, the saints and saintesses of the central world were the truly terrifying existences. If the saints and saintesses of the 4 major astral realms went to the central world, they could only be fake saints and saintesses. In addition to yearning for the mysterious central world, Xiao Chen was also full of curiosity about the realm above the Great Saint realm. From Qianling's words, it was not difficult for Xiao Chen to guess that the Great Saint realm was definitely not the limit of martial arts. Although there had never been anyone above the Great Saint realm in this world, it did not mean that the Great Saint realm was the limit of martial arts. There were definitely higher realms above it. It seems that the saying that martial arts have no end is true. Soon, he came back to his senses. At the same time, after returning, Xiao Chen truthfully told Tianyue, Qin Shiru, Fei Mei, Qin Yao, and the other girls about this matter. After hearing this news from Xiao Chen, the girls were extremely shocked. It took them almost 2 hours to come back to their senses. Xiao Chen was not too surprised by the girls' shock. This matter was too sensational, but fortunately, with Xiao Chen by their side, although the girls were shocked, they were not too timid and afraid. The reason was very simple. In the hearts of the girls, as long as Xiao Chen was there, it did not matter where they were. Because as long as they were with Xiao Chen, the girls' hearts were very stable and they felt very safe. After briefly telling the girls about this matter, the next day, Xiao Chen also brought Long Qing and Qianling to find Xiao Sheng and the other 4 old ancestors. He did not tell the 4 that Qianling was the reincarnation of a mighty person. This was also Qianling's idea. He casually found an excuse and only said that Qianling saw a record in a secret realm. He truthfully told Xiao Sheng and the other 3 about the central world and the 4 major astral realms. At first, the 4 of them were still a little skeptical. After all, this matter was too shocking. In the end, it was only after Xiao Chen's strong persuasion that Xiao Sheng and the other 4 were still half convinced. Old ancestor, this matter is very serious, so no matter what, it's better to believe it's true than not. Moreover, even if this record is fake, there's no loss for us to take some precautions in advance, right? Xiao Chen looked at Xiao Sheng and the other 3 and said. It was obvious that the 4 of them did not quite believe it, so Xiao Chen said this. After hearing this, the 4 of them were silent for a moment. Then, Xiao Sheng said with a serious expression. Chen is right. This matter is too serious, so it's better to believe it's true than not and make preparations in advance. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendation. Chapter 1209. Xiao Sheng chose to accept Xiao Chen's suggestion. In fact, this was very normal. First of all, Xiao Chen, Long Qing, and Qianling could be said to be the leaders of all the disciples in the sacred palace. Moreover, Xiao Sheng was very clear about their personalities. It was impossible for them to speak carelessly about such an important matter. Given Xiao Chen and the other 2's personalities, since they had spoken, it must be true. Moreover, as Xiaochen said, even if this matter was false, there was no harm in making early preparations for the sacred palace. As Xiaochen spoke, Randang, Binglian, and Mingjie nodded in succession after a brief moment of silence. All right, making early preparations is better than taking precautions. In that case, let's do as Chen and the others say. They accepted Xiaochen and the other two's suggestion. The preparation work was actually not complicated. It was just a matter of time and effort. However, the current sacred palace could still support the consumption of financial and material resources. According to Chen, once the four astral boundaries in the central world merged, the experts of the various races would begin to act. As a quasi-sage sect of the human race great saints in the central world would obviously rope in the sacred palace and provide protection and certain resources for the sacred palace. This was certain. After all, the 100 Races War was not based on sects or families, but on races. This was the meaning of the heavenly Tao. Therefore, every race was equivalent to a force. In order to let their own race win the 100 Races War, the warriors of the same race would definitely be very united. There was no doubt about this. After all, if they were divided, it would be detrimental to both sides. Everyone understood this simple logic. Moreover, during the 100 Races War, if there was still internal strife, it could only be said that they were digging their own graves. But on the other hand, the great sage of one's own race would provide protection, but the experts of the other races would definitely attack. Therefore, the moment of fusion was the most dangerous. If the great sage of another race found the sacred palace first, then the sacred palace would be in danger. However, this also depended on luck. After the fusion, where would the heavenly Qin continent appear? If it happened to appear in the territory of the human race, then there would be nothing to worry about. However, one could never place one's hopes on luck. Therefore, the necessary preparations had to be made. At the very least, the sacred palace needed to have the ability to stall for time until the great sage of the human race arrived. Combining all of the above reasons, Chen suggestion was to use the heavenly Qin continent as their priority. First, they had to set up a massive defensive formation to protect the heavenly Qin continent. This formation was huge, and it consumed a lot of resources. However, there was no other way. It had to be done. Next, a defensive formation was set up in every city and sect. This was the second layer of protection. Of course, the sacred palace didn't need to be engraved, but it needed to be strengthened. With these two layers of protection, they should be able to stall for some time. As for the rest, it would depend on the situation when the time came. The formation that enveloped the entire heavenly Qin continent had to be at least a top saint-grade formation. Otherwise, it wouldn't be able to stop the great sage. Next, a top saint-grade defensive formation had to be set up in every city and sect. These two sieges were incomparably huge, but it was all worth it. On the same day, Xiaosheng and the others issued orders according to Chen suggestion. The ones who completed this important task were naturally the Mulan Sacred Palace led by Quan Lan. The Mulan Sacred Palace was now the gathering place of the Sacred Palace's talisman masters and talisman array masters. The matter of engraving talisman arrays was naturally left to the Mulan Sacred Palace. Of course, several Sacred Palace Saint Venerables who also cultivated talisman arrays would also help this time. They didn't understand why the four ancestors had suddenly issued such an order, but the Sacred Palace quickly got to work under the four ancestors' orders. Batch after batch of large amounts of resources were transported to the hands of the Mulan Sacred Palace's Saintess, Quan Lan. The construction of the talisman arrays began immediately. The various sects and families of the heavenly Qin continent didn't return to the Sacred Palace's actions. On the contrary, they were very cooperative. This was normal. After all, the Sacred Palace was engraving defensive formations for them. This was a good thing, so only a fool would refuse. The engraving of the formations proceeded in an orderly manner. Half a month later, the Sacred Palace's actions attracted the attention of 9 heavens and the other 4 great sections. At the same time, the 4 great sects sent people to the Sacred Palace one after another. Xiao Sheng and the other three received them personally. No one knew what they discussed, but after the four great sects left, they began to imitate the sacred palace and began to draw defensive formations. Of course, the four great sects also gave the sacred palace great benefits. It felt like they were using money to buy information. Xiao Chen naturally guessed some of the four great sects' actions. It was very likely that Xiao Sheng and the others had told Nine Heavens and the other four great sects about the central world. However, this information wasn't given for free. To put it bluntly, it was sold. The sacred palace sold this information to Nine Heavens and the other four great sects at a high price. The five great sects of the North Star world were currently at the peak of their power and had begun to construct defensive formations on a large scale at the same time. This puzzled everyone in the North Star world, but the five great sects didn't say anything about this, nor did any news spread. Xiao Chen didn't care much about the five great sects' actions. After all, he didn't know how to construct talisman arrays. It was better to leave this matter to a professional like Quan Lan. After cultivating in seclusion for more than half a month, Xiao Chen finally waited for the day when the Black Demon Mountain would be opened. As one of the two secret zones that the Sacred Palace had just obtained, the opening of Black Demon Mountain was naturally a major event for the Sacred Palace. Because of Xiao Chen, Qin Shuru, Guling Yao and Fairy of 100 Flowers were also fortunate enough to enter Black Demon Mountain to cultivate. Even Fei Mei, Qing Yao, Qing Luo and the other girls were qualified to enter the secret cultivation zone. Thinking about it, Qing Yao, Qing Luo, and the other girls were not disciples of the Holy Palace. They were just Xiao Chen's maidservants. But now, they were all qualified to enter the secret cultivation zone to cultivate. Perhaps this was what people often said about following the right person. The sky had only just brightened, but many disciples had already gathered at the entrance of Black Demon Mountain and the 18 ghost zones. However, most of these people were clearly here to watch the show. Only a very small number of people were truly qualified to enter. Of course, in addition to the Sacred Palace disciples, Nine Heavens had also sent 5 chosen. Including Tianyu, there were exactly 6 people, which coincided with the 6 spots that the Sacred Palace had previously promised. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 12:10. The Nine Heavens had sent out 6 chosen to enter the 18 ghost regions in Black Demon Mountain to cultivate. At this moment, Xiao Chen, Long Qing, Chen Ling, Tianyu, Qin Shuru, Flower Fairy, Guling Yao, and the others were waiting at the entrance of Black Demon Mountain. Actually, the main reason they'd entered Black Demon Mountain this time was for Qin Shuru and the others. During this period of time, Xiao Chen, Chen Ling, Long Qing, and the others had entered the secret realm to cultivate. Only Qin Shuru and the others hadn't entered the secret realm. So, the gap between their cultivations had been pulled apart because of this. This time, Xiao Chen mainly hoped to improve their cultivations. As for himself, Xiao Chen didn't have any hope. After all, he'd just broken through to the perfection of the Tao Emperor realm, and it was extremely difficult for him to break through again even with the help of Black Demon Mountain. After all, even though the secret realm was formidable, it wasn't omnipotent. Otherwise, wouldn't any quasi-saint sect be filled with saints? Qin Shuru and the others were slightly excited because they were about to enter the secret realm for the first time. Actually, their natural talent wasn't much inferior to the chosen. To put it bluntly, the reason they didn't have the qualifications to enter the secret realm was entirely because of Xiao Chen. The 3 of them didn't want to leave Xiao Chen's side, so they didn't care about the empty title of chosen. Coupled with the fact that when the Nine Heavens and the other 3 sects opened the secret realm, they'd clearly stated that only the chosen of the 5 sects could enter. So, the 3 of them had lost the qualifications to enter. The 3 of them had done a lot for Xiao Chen, so Xiao Chen was naturally moved. So this time, Xiao Chen would rather not cultivate himself so that the 3 of them could obtain the greatest amount of benefits from Black Demon Mountain. They didn't have to wait for long before Xiao Sheng and the other 4 ancestors appeared in the air. The entrances of Black Demon Mountain and the 18 ghost regions were right next to each other, so all the disciples quickly quieted down when Xiao Sheng and the others appeared. This was the first time the Sacred Palace had opened its Heritage Secret Zone, so it could be considered an exception. Apart from the 6 chosen and saintesses of Ninth Heaven, the 10 chosen and saintesses of the Sacred Palace, as well as all the prospective chosen and saintesses, were qualified to enter Black Demon Mountain and the 18 ghost zones. Sweeping their eyes over the disciples present, Xiao Sheng and the other 3 didn't say anything. Bing Lian and Mingjie directly opened the entrances to the 2 secret realms. As soon as the entrances opened, the chosen, and Mingjie, the prospective chosen, and the prospective chosen of holy regions rushed into the secret realm. The chosen were all chosen in Mingjie, and the chosen were chosen were extremely excited to enter the secret realm. But, of course, compared to their excitement, the surrounding ordinary disciples were envious. This was because they did not have the qualifications to enter the Heritage Secret Realm. If they wanted to enter the Heritage Secret Realm, they would have to work hard. Like the others, Xiaochen led Tianyu, Qin Shuru, and the other 2 girls, as well as Chenling and Long Qing, into the Black Demon Mountain under the envious gazes of countless people. Everyone had already learned about Black Demon Mountain, so they weren't too surprised when they saw the giant black mountain in front of them after passing through the entrance. The entire Black Demon Mountain world was very simple. Other than a huge black mountain peak in the center, which was enough to make one speechless, there was nothing else. This giant black mountain was the only and most precious part of Black Demon Mountain. It was said that this black mountain was the first mountain formed when the North Star Realm was first formed. It was born with the ability to store, gather, and refine the world's spirit energy. Moreover, the world's spirit energy refined by Black Demon Mountain was extremely easy for people to refine. Therefore, cultivating on Black Demon Mountain was much easier than cultivating in the outside world. However, although Black Demon Mountain had such a terrifying ability, it also had some limitations. There was a mysterious pressure on Black Demon Mountain. Moreover, the closer one was to the top, the stronger the pressure. Of course, the closer one was to the top, the better the effect of cultivation. However, the prerequisite was that one had to be able to withstand the terrifying pressure. The top of the mountain was undoubtedly the best place to cultivate. However, the chosen in Mingjie who entered Black Demon Mountain with Xiao Chen and the others couldn't even reach the top of Black Demon Mountain. Very few people could even reach the middle of the mountain. The chosen and Mingjie climbed Black Demon Mountain with all their might until they could no longer withstand the pressure of Black Demon Mountain. Only then would they choose to stop. Everyone knew that the closer one was to the top, the better the effect would be. Therefore, many people also wanted to do their best to get closer to the top. Seeing these chosen and Mingjie climb Black Demon Mountain, Xiaochen looked at Qin Shuru and the other 2 girls and said, "Let's go too." As he spoke, Xiao Sheng, Tianyu, Chenling, and Long Qing acted together to protect Qin Shuru and the other 2 girls. They directly flew towards the top of Black Demon Mountain. He didn't let the 3 girls climb like the others. In fact, with their strength, climbing to the middle of the mountain was definitely not a problem. However, it was still a little difficult for them to reach the top. This was also because their cultivation was a little low. They were only at the perfection Dao King realm. Since they were already here, they naturally had to go to the best place to cultivate. So, Xiaochen couldn't be bothered to waste time and directly led Qin Shuru and the other 2 girls to the top of the mountain. Presently, Xiaochen, Tianyu, Chenling, and Long Qing were all at the perfection Dao King realm. Moreover, every single one of them possessed extraordinary combat strength. So, it wasn't too difficult for them to bring Qin Shuru and the other 2 girls to the top of the mountain. As they watched Qin Shuru and the other 2 girls easily and swiftly walk towards the top of the mountain under the protection of Xiao Chen's group of 4, all the chosen and Mingjie revealed expressions of envy along the way. It wasn't that Xiao Chen didn't want to help them in the face of their envy. However, he was truly powerless to do so. After all, the pressure on Black Demon Mountain was no joke. Xiao Chen's group of 4 were already at their limits protecting Qin Shuru and the other 2 girls. It was impossible for another person to successfully bring them to the top of the mountain. So, Xiao Chen's ability was limited, and he could only apologize. After all, compared to them, Xiao Chen was naturally more important to the people by his side. If he couldn't even help the people by his side and still wanted to help outsiders, then he wasn't being kind but foolish. All along the way, they smoothly arrived at the top of the mountain without any mishaps. At this moment, Xiaoxing's group of 4 still didn't rest. They took the initiative to resist the pressure on the top of the mountain so that the 3 girls could cultivate wholeheartedly. This time, Qin Shuru and the other 2 girls were at the center. Everything that Xiao Chen's group of 4 did was for the sake of allowing the 3 girls to obtain the best cultivation environment and maximizing their benefits as much as possible. Begging for a monthly vote, begging for a recommendation. Chapter 12:11. Xiao Chen's group of 4 sat around the 3 women and enveloped them with their auras, helping them resist the terrifying pressure at the peak of Black Demon Mountain. In this way, the 3 women could wholeheartedly immerse themselves in their cultivation. Just by sitting cross-legged, the 3 women could sense strands of pure spirit energy ceaselessly entering their bodies from within the mountain. The spirit energy was extremely pure without the slightest impurity. Moreover, they practically didn't need to refine it before it could be converted into their own spirit energy. After sitting cross-legged, Gu Lingyao looked at Xiao Chen, who was similarly sitting cross-legged in front of her, and a wisp of a smile appeared on her face as she said, "Husband, are we cheating by doing this?" The 3 women naturally noticed Xiao Chen's actions. It could be said that Xiao Chen had arranged everything for the 3 women during their cultivation on Black Demon Mountain this time. The 3 women only needed to focus on their cultivation and didn't need to care about anything else. Xiao Chen would deal with it. Such actions were indeed similar to cheating in the eyes of others, but no one would say anything about it. Firstly, Qin Shuru and the other 2 women were Xiao Chen's women, so Xiao Chen's actions were understandable. Secondly, Xiao Chen was the first chosen of the sacred palace, so he didn't need to care about what others thought of him at all. Xiao Chen smiled angrily when he heard Gu Lingyao's words. Make the best use of your time to cultivate and strive to break through to the Tao Emperor realm this time. This time, Xiao Chen's goal for the 3 women was to break through to the Tao Emperor realm in one go. Breaking through to the Tao Emperor realm was indeed a little too high of a goal, and it was clearly impossible to succeed under normal circumstances. However, things were different now that they had Black Demon Mountain. The 3 women had a very high chance of breaking through to the Tao Emperor realm in one go if they cultivated here. Gu Lingyao stuck out her tongue cutely when she heard Xiao Chen's words, and then she closed her eyes and started cultivating as well. Cultivation on Black Demon Mountain was very peaceful. With the help of Xiao Chen's group of 4, the 3 women's cultivation improved rapidly. Although the 3 women had missed the opportunity to enter the secret realm some time ago, they didn't slack off in their cultivation at all. They weren't far from the Tao Emperor realm, so with the help of Black Demon Mountain and Xiao Chen's group, their cultivation naturally improved rapidly. Time passed day by day. The 2 secret realms would be open for a month this time. A month sounded like a long time, but it was only the blink of an eye during cultivation. 20+ days, Xiao Chen's group of 4, the 3 women's auras. When he sensed the appearance of the 3 women's auras, Xiao Chen, who had his eyes closed, smiled and said, "They're about to break through." During this month, Xiao Chen, Tianyu, Chenling, and Long Qing didn't cultivate. Instead, they used all their energy to resist the pressure of Black Demon Mountain for the 3 women. The pressure on the mountain peak wasn't weak, so it wasn't easy for Xiao Chen's group of 4 to resist it. This could be seen from their pale faces. It wasn't hard to imagine that the 4 of them had consumed a lot of energy during these 20+ days to help Qin Shuru's group of 3 resist the pressure of Black Demon Mountain. In order to help Qin Shuru's group of 3 break through to the Tao Emperor realm as soon as possible, Xiao Chen's group of 4 could be said to have done their best. Of course, the ones they should thank the most were Chenling and Long Qing. After all, the 2 of them had given up an excellent cultivation opportunity to help Xiao Chen. Chen and Long Qing didn't have the slightest advantage in doing so, but the two of them didn't complain at all. The three of them were siblings, and since Xiaochen had spoken, they naturally had no reason to refuse. It was finally time to break through. It wasn't just Xiaochen. A wisp of a smile appeared on the corners of Tianyu's, Chenling's, and Long Qing's mouths. Another day passed. At this moment, the fluctuations of spirit energy on their bodies grew more and more intense. In the end, accompanied by a terrifying storm of spirit energy, their cultivations finally broke through the limits of the Dao Emperor realm and arrived at the Dao Emperor realm. Along with their breakthroughs, the spirit energy in the surroundings madly converged towards them. Black Demon Mountain was a secret realm with extremely dense spirit energy, so there was no need to worry about the spirit energy here being insufficient for their breakthroughs. However, in less than 2 hours of time, their auras had quickly stabilized, and they were fixed at the threshold of the Dao Emperor realm. Their cultivations had successfully broken through, and they opened their eyes with excitement. Especially Gu Lingyao, she couldn't help but look at Xiaochen with the intention of saying something. However, before she could speak, Xiaochen had interrupted her. There are still 3 more days. Don't waste it and try your best to stabilize your cultivations. He didn't give them too much time to be happy because there were still 3 more days before the 1-month deadline. Xiaochen intended for them to make the best use of these 3 days and utilize the dense spirit energy on Black Demon Mountain to directly stabilize their cultivations. Breaking through to a higher realm was different from breaking through to a higher realm. At the same time, it was obviously much more time-consuming to stabilize one's cultivation after breaking through to a higher realm. On the other hand, if they were able to utilize the assistance of Black Demon Mountain and successfully stabilize their cultivations during these 3 days, then it would obviously save a great deal of time. When they heard Xiaochen, they didn't even have the time to feel happy before they started cultivating once more. On the other hand, Gu Lingyao even puckered her lips with displeasure, but she didn't say anything. 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. After a month passed, all the disciples that had entered Black Demon Mountain and the Ghost Territory were forcefully teleported out. After leaving Black Demon Mountain for a month, Qin Shuru and the others' cultivations had already stabilized at the threshold of the Dao Emperor realm. On the other hand, after a month of bitter cultivation, Gu Lingyao was finally able to act coquettishly by Xiaochen's side without the slightest scruple. After they left Black Demon Mountain, Gu Lingyao hung on to Xiaochen and spoke incessantly. Husband, Sister Shuru, Sister Baihua, and I have all successfully broken through to the Dao Emperor realm. Are there any rewards? This little girl actually wants a reward after breaking through on her own. When he heard this, Xiaochen said helplessly, "You broke through on your own, yet you still want others to reward you. I don't care. In any case, I broke through. Are you going to give it to me or not?" Gu Lingyao refused to comply. When he saw this, Xiaochen smiled and rubbed the little girl's head helplessly. "All right, tell me what reward you want. Even if it's the moon in the sky, I'll pluck it down for you." "I don't want the moon. I want husband to take us out to play. You haven't taken us out to play in a long time. Moreover, there are many places in the North Star boundary that we haven't been to." Gu Lingyao pouted when she heard this. Begging for your collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 12:12. Gu Lingyao held Xiaochen's hand and acted coquettishly. Previously, due to the tense situation in the North Star realm, everyone's nerves had been tense. Besides fighting, Gu Lingyao and the others had not gone anywhere else to play. At this moment, facing Gu Lingyao's coquettishness, Xiaochen looked at Tianyue and Qin Shuru. He also felt that it was a good thing to bring the girls to play in the North Star realm. According to what Chen had said, since the 100 Race War was about to break out, there was not much time left for peace. Furthermore, the North Star realm would no longer exist at that time. As such, they should take advantage of this opportunity to bring everyone to relax. In fact, Xiaochen still felt a sense of self-blame. This self-blame came from the fact that Xiaochen felt that he had not spent enough time with his family. Not only Tianyue and Qin Shuru, but even Bai Ruyue and Xiao Qing were the same. That's right. If Xiao Qian wanted his family, he had to be powerful enough. In order to be powerful, he had to fight and fight. As such, he naturally did not have much time to spend with his family. However, this could not be considered an excuse. It could only be said that he was helpless. Therefore, as long as Xiao Qian had time, he would accompany his family and try his best to make up for this regret. Therefore, without much hesitation, Xiao Qian quickly agreed. Okay, then let's go to various places in the North Star Realm to play. He could not bear to reject Gu Lingyao's request. Of course, this was also what Qin Shuru and the others were thinking. Hearing Xiao Qian's words, Gu Lingyao was naturally so happy that she danced with joy. She jumped directly onto Xiao Qian and refused to get down. After confirming that they were going to the North Star Domain, they did not waste any time. The next morning, Xiao Qian, Qin Shuru, Maid Tianyue, Qing Yao, Qing Luo, Fei Mei, and Lan, Bai Ruyue, Xiao Qing, Long Qing, Chen Ling, and even Chen Yu came. The girls, Chen Ling and Long Qing had naturally received Xiao Qian's invitation, while Chen Yu and the others had volunteered to come after hearing the news. Xiao Qian naturally welcomed Chen Yu and the others who wanted to tag along. Immediately after, the group boarded a starship and began their journey. It was a rare opportunity for them to relax. According to the plan of Gu Lingyao, Tianyu, Qin Shuru, and 100 Flower Fairy, they planned to tour the entire North Star Realm. Every time they arrived at a continent, they would come down and tour it. With their current status, no one in the North Star Realm dared to provoke them, so they had some leisure time. The only troublesome thing was the appearance of Tianyue, Qin Shuru, and the other three ladies. Of course, there was also Qing Yao, Qing Luo, Fei Mei, and Lan. Their beauty was also top-notch. Although they weren't as devastatingly beautiful as Qin Shuru and the other three ladies, they were definitely enough to mesmerize everyone. The appearance of a group of beauties naturally attracted a lot of attention, especially beauties with such beauty that could cause the downfall of a country. Hence, almost everywhere they went, the girls could be said to be the absolute focus of attention. Regarding this, Xiao Qian was helpless. Chen Yu, on the other hand, was drinking and teasing him heartlessly. Haha, junior brother Xiao, I think that in the North Star Realm, when it comes to women, if you claim to be number 2, no one would dare to claim to be number 1. Chen Yu's words were not false. As Xiao Qian's reputation rose, many people in the North Star Realm knew that not only did Xiao Qian have 4 beautiful wives, but even his 6 maids were top-notch beauties. Who knew how many people of the younger generation envied Xiao Qian? However, Xiao Qian did not care about this at all. At this time, when he heard Chen Yu's words, Xiao Qian said in a displeased tone. Senior brother Chen Yu, why? Are you envious? Let Tianyu introduce 2 heavenly clan beauties to you. Haha, no need, no need. After hearing Xiao Qian's words, Chen Yu, who had just taken a sip of wine, almost choked to death. In the end, he smiled embarrassedly. Everyone traveled around the North Star Realm. In the blink of an eye, 2 years had passed. In these 2 years, everyone's footprints had practically covered every corner of the North Star Realm. These 2 years could be said to be Xiao Qian's happiest 2 years. There were no life and death battles, and he did not need to think too much. He just stayed with his family like this. Everyone traveled the mountains and rivers together and experienced the vastness of the world together. In fact, this kind of happiness had always been what Xiao Qian pursued. However, Xiao Qian understood that now was not the time to relax. For the sake of his family, he had to constantly become stronger. After 2 years of traveling, everyone finally took a big detour and returned to the sacred palace. After 2 years, the sacred palace had not changed much. However, the defensive formations had been completely completed by Quanlan and the Mulan Sacred Hall. Today, the sacred palace could be said to be ready to face the 100 Races War at any time. After returning to the sacred palace, another month of peaceful days passed. It was also 1 month later that the upheaval that Chen Ling had mentioned finally arrived. At midnight, the continents of the North Star realm began to involuntarily gather together, as if they were being forcefully sucked over by some force. Being in the sacred palace, Xiaochen and the others naturally felt this change. Not long after, Xiaosheng and the other 4 patriarchs gathered the 10 chosen, and saint sovereigns of the sacred palace in the sacred hall. What Qianling had said had happened. However, only Xiaosheng and the other 4 patriarchs, as well as Xiaochen and a few others knew about it. The others did not know. At this time, Xiaosheng and the other 4 patriarchs had gathered everyone in the sacred hall. It was obvious that they were going to announce this matter. Now that the upheaval had occurred, it proved that Qianling's words were not groundless or false. Soon, the sacred hall of the sacred palace, which was already late at night, was brightly lit. One by one, the experts of the sacred palace arrived. Everyone gathered in the hall. Xiaosheng and the other 4 patriarchs sat on the main seats. After everyone had arrived, Randang said in a deep voice, "Did everyone feel the upheaval tonight?" Hearing Randang's words, everyone nodded in confusion. They could feel that the heavenly Qin continent was moving at an extremely fast speed. Furthermore, the heavenly Qin continent had already started to connect with the surrounding continents. The continents that should have been unrelated to each other had now merged into a new continent. This made everyone extremely confused. Seeing everyone nod, Randang continued, "The North Star realm, or rather this world, is about to undergo an upheaval. Today, I called everyone here to discuss this matter. Please collect, vote, recommend." Chapter 12-13. 2 years had passed since the destruction of the Night Ghost Pavilion and Demonic Sky Palace. In these 2 years, the sacred palace had developed steadily and its strength had improved a lot, especially Xiaosheng and the other 3 patriarchs. Needless to say, Xiaosheng had broken through to the initial stage of the quasi-saint realm 2 years ago. In these 2 years, Randang, Binglian, and Mingjie had also broken through to the initial stage of the quasi-saint realm. This was naturally great news for the sacred palace. But now, the 100-race war had arrived. Soon, the 4 astral realms would merge with the central world, and the peaceful times would no longer exist. Xiaosheng and the other 3 patriarchs had hidden this matter from everyone for 2 years. Now, they could no longer hide it, so Randang told everyone the truth. This was the first time they had heard about the 100-race war. As soon as Randang finished speaking, everyone except Xiaochen, Qianling, and Longqing were shocked. Randang and the other 3 patriarchs did not disturb everyone. This matter was indeed too sensational, so they had to give everyone some time to digest it. They did not rush them. After a long while, everyone spoke one after another. The 4 astral realms and the central world. Is the world we live in really so vast? I thought the North Star realm was big enough. Yes, it seems that we have always been frogs at the bottom of a well. The sacred venerables spoke one after another. They were all experts of the older generation, but they were still extremely shocked when faced with this reality. It was indeed difficult to accept. While everyone was talking, Xiaosheng on the high platform finally spoke. He waved his hand, and everyone quickly quieted down. At the same time, Xiaosheng said indifferently, "No one can stop the 100-race war. No one can stop the 100-race war. This is the will of the heavenly Tao. What we need to prepare now is how to safely integrate into the central world. You already know that the central world is not like the 4 great astral boundaries. There are great saint emperors there. There were many things that couldn't be changed or disobeyed. As such, the only thing the sacred palace could do was to protect itself to the greatest extent possible and allow the entire sacred palace to smoothly integrate into the central world." While the sacred palace was having a tense discussion, the 9 heavens, Myriad Beast Valley, Supreme Deity Sect, and Liwang Sect were the same. 2 years ago, the 4 great sects had paid a hefty price to obtain news of the 100-race war from the sacred palace. Although they were skeptical at that time, they naturally no longer had any doubts now that the situation had changed. The sudden change happened without any warning, leaving no time for anyone to react. In just one night, the countless scattered continents in the North Star realm had perfectly merged into one gigantic continent. Moreover, as all the continents in the North Star realm merged, the horizon of the North Star realm began to collapse. As the horizon collapsed, the space in the North Star realm began to distort. When ordinary people looked up at the sky, they could clearly see that the sky was like a towel that had been forcefully twisted by someone. The entire sky was distorted, and at the same time, cracks had already covered the entire sky. The sun and moon hung in the sky at the same time, and both were already showing signs of collapse. Even the sun and moon were about to collapse. The North Star realm was like the end of the world. The cultivators were still fine with the scene before them. After all, they were powerful and had a broader vision. However, the ordinary people without cultivation were already completely scared out of their wits. All of them hid in their homes in fear and constantly prayed to the so-called gods, hoping that the heavens would bless them. Unlike the panic and helplessness of ordinary people, the 5 great quasi-saint sects had already begun their most intense preparations. The defensive formations that they had spent 2 years drawing were all activated, and the important cities were protected. In particular, the 5 great quasi-saint sects were tightly protected by the defensive formations. Everything was going on in a tight schedule. Xiaochen had just finished dealing with the matters at hand and was heading to the residence of Bai Ruiyue and Xiaoqing. The 2 elders were still calm. After all, they had been by Xiaochen's side all these years. Although they were always protected by Xiaochen, the 2 elders' vision had indeed improved a lot. Therefore, they were still able to remain calm in the face of such a situation. "Chener," Bai Ruiyue called out when she saw Xiaochen walking over. At the same time, Xiaoqing, Tianyu, Qin Shuru, Qing Yao, Qing Luo, and the other girls all looked at Xiaochen. Xiaochen smiled faintly in the face of everyone's gaze. "Don't worry, it'll be fine." Xiaochen gestured for everyone not to worry too much. Subsequently, he chatted with everyone for a while before leaving. As the first chosen of the sacred palace, there were many things that Xiaochen still needed to deal with. He walked all the way to the square outside the sacred hall on the main peak of the sacred palace. Xiao Sheng and the other patriarchs were all present, along with a group of sacred palace experts. Everyone had already done what they needed to do. Next, they could only deal with the situation as they saw fit. The sudden change caused the tens of billions of living beings in the various races of the North Star domain to be extremely alarmed. At the same time, the 5 quasi-saint sects announced the 100 races war to the public one day later. Of course, they only gave a simple introduction and didn't go into too much detail. The only reason he did this was to allow the living beings in the North Star realm to be prepared. Of course, once this news spread, it naturally caused a huge commotion throughout the North Star realm. However, the 5 great quasi-saint sects no longer had the time to care about the outside world's reaction. Given the current situation, they could only clean up the snow in front of their own doors. After the fusion, the incomparably huge continent of the North Star boundary approached the central world at a terrifying speed. For 3 consecutive days, the vast continent seemed to be experiencing an earthquake as the ground trembled continuously. In the face of such tremors, everyone knew that it was not an earthquake, but because the continent was currently moving at high speed. It was many times faster than the speed of a starship. While the North Star boundary was rapidly approaching the central world, the great sage of the various races in the central world were already prepared. In the main hall of a huge mansion in a vast city, a skinny old man with a yellowish complexion and a face full of wrinkles sat on a high throne. Below him, over a dozen human experts sat respectfully. The old man looked at the crowd and said indifferently, "You're right. You're right. You're right. You can start preparing. Seeking collection, seeking monthly votes, seeking recommendations." Chapter 12-14. Hearing the old man's words, the dozen or so human race experts all nodded respectfully. This was absolutely shocking. Not only was the old man a great sage emperor in this small hall, but there were also more than a dozen people below him. The weakest among them was a quasi-sage Great Venerate, and there were even 4 half-step Great Sages. This kind of strength was enough to easily sweep across the North Star world. However, this was only one of the human race clans in the Central World. That's right, the old man and everyone present came from a large human race clan in the Central World. For a large clan to possess such strength, it was clear how strong the Central World was as a whole. No one knew what the elder meant by preparing to take action, but soon, all the experts in the hall had disappeared, leaving only the elder in the hall. At this moment, the elder let out a long sigh and said, "Let's go. Let's go. I hope the human race won't suffer too many casualties this time." Chen had said before that every time the 100 Race War began, the first wave of danger was the most serious when the 4 astral realms and the Central World merged. This was because the major forces of the 4 astral realms had just merged with the Central World. Moreover, the 4 astral realms and the Central World could not be compared at all. Therefore, if they were unlucky at this time, it was very likely that they would be completely wiped out. It was very important to know where the Central World would merge. If they could enter the human race's territory as soon as they arrived, they would be safe. However, if they entered the territory of a foreign race as soon as they arrived, it could only be said that everything pointed to disaster. Time passed slowly. Half a month later, the North Star World and the Central World finally began to merge. The North Star World, which had already merged together, was directly separated and began to merge with the Central World. It was like 2 pieces of cloth being forced together. There was no pattern to this at all. Everything could only rely on luck. In the Sacred Palace, the sacred realm where the Sacred Palace was located was forcefully separated from the small world, forming a small new continent that began to merge with the Central World. The speed of the fusion was very fast. In less than an hour, the ground left, and the land where the Holy Palace was located slowly fell to the Central World. Then, the ground healed again, as if nothing had happened. They had finally arrived at the Central World. They could clearly feel that the rich world energy of the Central World was constantly surging towards them through the defensive array. He had never felt such a dense heaven and earth spirit chi. This was just an ordinary place in the Central World, but the heaven and earth spirit chi was so dense that it was not inferior to an ordinary cultivation secret realm. What a rich spiritual energy of heaven and earth! Many disciples couldn't help but exclaim. However, compared to the shock of the numerous disciples, on the main peak of the Sacred Palace, Chen expression had become incomparably solemn. He glanced at the surrounding environment. Although Chen had not returned to the Central World for tens of thousands of years, he was still able to determine which race's territory this place belonged to. The Central World was different from the 4 astral worlds. The continents of the 4 astral worlds were divided and scattered everywhere, but the Central World only had one continent. It was huge, and hundreds of races lived together on it. It was precisely because the situation in the Central World was different from the 4 astral worlds that the 100 races of the Central World placed great importance on territory, and the division of territory was very clear. Moreover, due to the different habits and beliefs of the various races, not only were there differences in the construction of cities, but even the surrounding environment was fundamentally different. Just like now, just by looking at the surrounding environment, Chen could already tell that this was not the territory of the human race, but the territory of the ghost race. The black deadwood would not appear in the human race's territory, but the surrounding area was densely packed with black deadwood. The black deadwood was a type of tree that was completely black and had a hard texture. However, in the entire Central World, only the ghost race liked the black deadwood, and the other races hated it. The reason was very simple: the black deadwood would release a black mist for a period of time every year. This was why the other races did not like it, and could even be said to hate it. However, it was different for the ghost race. The ghost race was born to live in the darkness, so they naturally had an abnormal love for the black deadwood. Chen expression turned ugly when he actually landed in the ghost race's territory. At the same time, Xiaochen also noticed the change in Chen expression, and walked up to him and asked, "What's wrong? Looks like our luck isn't too good. we're very unlucky. Qianling did not hide inside. We're not in the human race's territory? Hearing this, Xiaoqian frowned slightly. Not only that, we just happened to land in the ghost race's territory, and the ghost race has the worst relationship with the human race. Qianling smiled bitterly. If it was any other race, it would be better, but there was no need to doubt the ghost race. As long as they knew that the ghost race's the great sage would definitely come immediately and destroy the sacred palace without the slightest hesitation, because the sacred palace was a faction of the human race. I only hope that the human race's reinforcements can come quickly, or things will be troublesome. Qianling finally said. Soon, everyone knew that they were in the ghost race's territory, and for a time, a tense atmosphere began to rapidly spread among the upper echelons of the sacred palace. Once again gathered in the sacred palace, Xiaoqian looked at the people below and said, "Everyone, now that the situation is clear, how should we deal with it? Ancestor, since we're in the ghost race's territory, can we leave first?" Hearing this, a saint venerate asked. But just as he finished speaking, Qianling shook his head and said, "That's impossible. The central world is already vast and boundless, and now that it has merged with the 4 great astral realms, it's even more unimaginable. It's impossible for us to escape from the ghost race's territory. Even if we travel at full speed, with the speed of a saint, it'll take at least half a month to leave the ghost race's territory, let alone the disciples below. The ghost race won't give us so much time. It was impossible to escape while the ghost race was not paying attention." Hearing this, everyone's expression became even more solemn. Seeing this, Qianling did not keep them in suspense and directly said, "There's only one way now, and that is to wait for reinforcements until the human race's great sage arrives. At that time, there will be a possibility of negotiation." Sacred Son Qianling, how are you so sure that the human race's great sage will definitely come to rescue us? Hearing this, a saint venerate asked. Please add, please vote, please recommend. Chapter 12-15. Qianling wanted to defend and wait for reinforcements, which was equivalent to placing all his hopes on the great sage of the human race. But what if the great sage of the human race did not come to his rescue? At that time, the sacred palace would really be finished. In response to this sacred master's question, the rest of the people also nodded slightly, and then looked at Qianling, waiting for his answer. Facing the crowd's gaze, Qianling smiled slightly and said, "The great sage of the human race will definitely come to the rescue when he receives the news. As for the reason, it's very simple, because we are of the same race." Qianling had absolute confidence that as long as the great sage of the human race received the news, he would definitely come because the sacred palace was a human force, and not an ordinary force, but the only quasi-sage sect in the North Star realm founded by the human race. Such a force could not be ignored by the entire human race, so the great sage of the human race could not sit idly by. Seeing how certain Qianling was, everyone was still a little skeptical. However, Xiaosheng, who was on the high platform, spoke up at this time. "Holy Son Qianling's words are reasonable. Now our only choice is to defend and wait for reinforcements." Everyone present had doubts about Qianling's words, but Xiaoqian chose to believe Qianling. Since Xiaosheng had spoken, the people present naturally did not dare to say anything more. After deciding to defend and wait for reinforcements, the next step was to prepare for defense. The first was naturally the defensive formation. To fight against the great sage, the formation was the only thing the sacred palace could rely on. Once the formation was broken, the sacred palace would no longer have the power to turn the situation around. After all, no one in the sacred palace could fight against the great sage, not even Xiaosheng and the other 3. All the resources of the sacred palace were allocated to the operation of the formation. At the same time, if the great sage of the ghost race attacked, Xiaosheng and the other 3 would have to personally guard the formation, otherwise it would be difficult to resist the attack of the great sage of the ghost race. Preparations began densely. According to Qianling's estimation, the great sage of the ghost race would definitely arrive within 3 days. While the sacred palace was preparing for the upcoming battle, in a mountain range not far from here, there was a ghost race sect standing proudly. Moreover, this ghost race sect was a supreme saint sect. The great sage was presiding over it. It was the Ghost Emperor sect. At this time, in the main hall of the Ghost Emperor sect, more than 10 half-step great sages and quasi-sages sat respectfully. And great too. They had basically investigated the situation of the sacred palace. Although it was very superficial, there were no mistakes. It seemed that the Ghost Emperor's intelligence network was not simple. The quasi-sage sect of the human race from the North Star realm was not far from the Ghost Emperor sect. Hearing this, a cold light flashed in Ghost Emperor sect's eyes as he said indifferently, "Very well. Since the heavens have given us such a great gift, it would be a shame if we don't accept it." Just as Chen said, the ghost race and the human race were the most disliked. The relationship between the two races had always been very tense. It could be said that they had always been in a hostile position. Now that the Ghost Emperor sect knew about the existence of the sacred palace, there was naturally nothing to say. They had to destroy it as soon as possible. Otherwise, the human race's great sages would definitely come to stop them when they heard the news. At that time, things would become more troublesome. After all, the human race's great sages would not give up on a quasi-sage sect. On that day, the figures of the Ghost Emperor sect flew into the sky, and then directly disappeared into the void, heading in the direction of the sacred palace. Because they wanted to destroy the sacred palace before the human race's great sages arrived, the Ghost Emperor sect did not send many people this time, only a few dozen people. However, these people were all experts. Among them, there were 2 half-step great sages, 8 quasi-saint great sages, and all of them were saint realm experts. Of course, in addition to these, there was also the Great Sage Emperor sect's great sage, Ghost Emperor sect's great sage. The experts traversed the void and quickly rushed to the location of the sacred palace. At night, the sky slowly darkened, and the bright moon climbed into the sky. The night was very beautiful, but at this time, no one in the sacred palace was in the mood to enjoy such a beautiful scenery. Everyone looked nervous, as if waiting for something. Xiao Chen and many other experts of the sacred palace had been sitting in the sacred palace, ready to deal with the arrival of the ghost race experts at any time. The night was very quiet, and as the night deepened, the surroundings became even more silent. It was in this silence that the first terrifying pressure finally descended. Feeling the appearance of this pressure, Xiao Chen, and other experts of the sacred palace, who originally had their eyes closed in the sacred palace, suddenly opened their eyes. At this time, Xiao Shen shouted coldly, "They're here! Everyone, let's go!" They had been waiting for the arrival of the ghost race experts, and now, the time had finally come. As Xiao Shen's voice fell, the experts of the sacred palace flew out of the sacred palace and came to the main square. Through the array, they looked at the sky above. At this time, spatial cracks appeared in the sky, and one by one, the ghost race experts walked out of the spatial cracks. These ghost race experts seemed to be casually standing in various places in the sky, firmly surrounding the entire sacred palace. At the same time, after these people appeared, 3 even larger spatial cracks appeared. Immediately, the 2 half-step great saints and sovereign Ghost Frost slowly walked out of the 3 spatial cracks. 2 half-step great sages stood respectfully on both sides of sovereign Ghost Frost. They were slightly behind to show their respect. Sovereign Ghost Frost came to the sky above the holy palace with a calm expression. He looked at the people on the main square and said with a natural expression, "For quasi-saint great sovereigns. As expected of a quasi-saint sect, you have a protective array. It seems that you have been prepared for this for a long time, but do you think this array alone can save you?" As soon as he spoke, Sovereign Ghost Frost did not say anything like surrendering and sparing their lives, because it was simply impossible. Given the relationship between the ghost race and the human race, it was simply impossible. Therefore, Sovereign Ghost Frost could not be bothered to say any more nonsense. Moreover, in his opinion, although the sacred palace was prepared, this array alone was not enough to stop him. Please collect, please vote, please recommend. Chapter 12:16. A Great Saint. This was a living great saint. A solemn look flashed across the eyes of the Sacred Palace experts when they heard Sovereign Ghost Frost's words. This was the first time they had seen the great sage with their own eyes. Although Sovereign Ghost Frost did not release the slightest bit of aura, nor did he exude any so-called pressure, Sovereign Ghost Frost simply stood there and calmly spoke a few words. Everyone present could not help but feel fear. Simply put, Sovereign Ghost Frost's words were like the law. If he said that he wanted the sacred palace to be destroyed, then the sacred palace must be destroyed. It was a simple sentence, but it was like an imperial edict that no one could resist. Even Xiaosheng and the other three, who were quasi-saints, seemed so insignificant in front of Sovereign Ghost Frost. It was also because there was a layer of array separating them. Otherwise, the ordinary disciples of the sacred palace would have been scared out of their wits by Sovereign Ghost Frost. What a joke! How could these disciples resist Sovereign Ghost Frost's pressure? Sovereign Ghost Frost did not wait for the crowd to respond. Perhaps from the beginning, he did not intend to listen to the sacred palace's response. The reason was very simple. Who would listen to a group of people who were about to die? He gently pointed his finger. As Sovereign Ghost Frost continued to descend, a black finger light instantly streaked across the sky. It was silent and did not have any terrifying power. However, wherever the black finger light passed, the space began to collapse inch by inch. Along the way, as the black finger light flew past, a long spatial crack appeared in the air behind it, as if it had been torn apart. With a casual point of his finger, he could easily tear the space apart. Finally, under everyone's gaze, the black finger light bombarded the array. There was still no earth-shattering aftermath. It was a very strange collision, but everyone found that when the black finger light hit the array seemed to have been forcibly dissolved by something in an instant. He broke it with a single blow? Someone from the sacred palace exclaimed in disbelief upon seeing this. It had taken 2 years and countless resources of the sacred palace to build this array, but now, it could not even withstand a single blow from Sovereign Ghost Frost. Many sacred palace disciples revealed looks of horror on their faces. Indeed, if it was an ordinary saint-level array, it would definitely not be able to stop a great sage like Emperor Ghost Frost. As Emperor Ghost Frost himself said, it was indeed too whimsical for a saint-level array to stop him. With Sovereign Ghost Frost's eyesight, he could naturally tell the level of the sacred palace's talisman array at a glance. Therefore, from the very beginning, Sovereign Ghost Frost was full of confidence. However, it was a pity that the talisman matrix protecting the Holy Palace was not an ordinary saint-level talisman matrix. It was a talisman matrix from ancient times that Xiaochen had brought out from the secret realm of the Celestial Expanse sect. Moreover, it was the highest-level defensive talisman matrix. In order to inscribe this talisman array, all the talisman array masters in the Sacred Palace had given it their all. It wasn't just Quanlan and her Orchid Sacred Hall. Even some saint sovereigns who cultivated talisman arrays had given it their all. Therefore, the few saint-level talisman array masters did not show much nervousness or fear when they saw the black finger light cut open the array. Instead, they spoke confidently. If this formation is so easily broken, then wouldn't we have wasted the past 2 years of our lives? Following these people's words, the formation that had been rapidly collapsing suddenly began to recover rapidly. At the same time, the black finger light of Ghost Frost's sovereign was swallowed up in an instant. The talisman array inheritance of the Sky Expanse sect's secret domain could be said to be far beyond this era. It was a treasure that had been left behind since ancient times. As the highest-level defensive symbol array, it was called the 9 Suns Encirclement Array, which was also the array protecting the Sacred Palace at this moment. Unlike ordinary saint-level defensive symbol arrays, the 9 Suns Encirclement Array not only had terrifying defensive capabilities, but also had the ability to devour and self-heal. To put it simply, when the 9 Suns Encirclement Array was attacked, not only could it rapidly self-heal, but it could also devour the opponent's attack to support the operation of the array. With the ability to self-heal and devour, the 9 Suns Encirclement Array was undoubtedly extremely terrifying. It could not be compared to the commonly seen Saint-level defensive symbols. He originally thought that a casual attack would be enough to break the Sacred Palace's defensive symbol array, but he did not expect the 9 Suns Encirclement Array to remain as stable as Mount Tai. In the face of such an outcome, Sovereign Ghost Frost's face turned grave. He stared intently at the 9 Suns to Jura formation. After a long while, a look of understanding flashed across his eyes. He then regained his composure and spoke in an indifferent tone. An ancient symbol array. Not bad indeed. Although this array is very strong, how long can it stop me? Sovereign Ghost Frost could easily break an ordinary defensive symbol array. Although the 9 Suns Encirclement Array was much stronger than an ordinary Saint-level defensive symbol array, it was not unbreakable. The 9 Suns Encirclement Array could still be broken, but it would take some effort. Sovereign Ghost Frost ordered the Ghost Emperor sect experts around him, attack this array with all your might. Sovereign Ghost Frost was not familiar with symbol arrays and had never studied them. Therefore, he could only break the array with brute force if he wanted to, unless he could find a symbol array master with a high cultivation base to help him. However, Sovereign Ghost Frost did not have such an idea. First of all, there were very few symbol array masters who had the ability to break the 9 Suns Encirclement Array. Even in the Central World, they were rare. It was undoubtedly a waste of time to find a symbol array master who could break the 9 Suns Encirclement Array, so it was better to break it with brute force. Although it would take a lot of time to break it with brute force, it was obviously less than finding a symbol array master. As Sovereign Ghost Frost's voice faded, many experts of the Ghost Emperor sect attacked one after another, including the 2 half-step Great Saints. At this time, they also attacked the array without holding back. At the same time, the 9 Suns Encirclement Array endured the attacks of dozens of half-step Great Saints, Quasi-Saints, and Saints, but it was still as stable as Mount Tai. Everyone's attacks were constantly swallowed by the 9 Suns Encirclement Array. At the same time, the damaged areas were also rapidly healing, showing no signs of collapse. Dozens of Ghost Emperor sect experts attacked with all their strength, but they still could not shake the 9 Suns Encirclement Array in the slightest. Seeing this scene, many disciples of the Sacred Palace slowly breathed a sigh of relief. As long as the array was still there and had not been broken, there was still hope for the Sacred Palace. As long as they could hold on until the great saints of the human race arrived, there would be a turn for the better. Request collection, request monthly votes, request recommendation. Chapter 12-17. The only thing the Sacred Palace wanted to do now was to hold on for a while longer. The longer they held on, the greater their chances of survival. Sovereign Ghost Frost naturally knew what the Sacred Palace was thinking. At this time, he also began to attack. Dozens of Ghost Emperor sect experts attacked together, not to mention that there was a Great Saint Sovereign. Various terrifying superpowers bombarded the array in the sky. At the same time, waves of powerful auras pressed down on the Sacred Palace disciples, making it difficult for them to breathe. Under such a violent attack, even the 9 Suns Encirclement Array showed signs of exhaustion. Sensing that the 9 Suns Encirclement Array was about to collapse, several Saint Sovereigns who were proficient in seal arrays came to Shaoxing's group and said anxiously, "Ancestor, we have to act now." In the face of such an attack, Shaoxing's group and the Saint Sovereigns of the Sacred Palace had to do their best to maintain the 9 Suns Encirclement Array. The array must not be broken. It was the only capital the Sacred Palace had to contend against the Ghost Emperor sect. Without the array, the Sacred Palace would undoubtedly be defeated by the Ghost Emperor sect. Shaoxing's group nodded solemnly without much hesitation. Subsequently, Shaoxing's group and the Saint Sovereigns sat down cross-legged on the square. Soon after, terrifying auras shot out from everyone's bodies and quickly entered the 9 Suns Tajura array. The principle behind what Shaoxing's group was doing was very simple. It was nothing more than instilling all of their spiritual energy into the 9 Suns Encirclement Array, allowing it to operate at full power. As everyone's spiritual energy poured in, sure enough, the array, which was already in a precarious state, quickly stabilized. With enough spiritual energy, the 9 Suns Encirclement Array could operate at full power. When it operated at full power, the attacks of the Ghost Emperor sect experts could hardly threaten the 9 Suns Encirclement Array. After all, although the Ghost Emperor sect's attacks were fierce, they could not destroy the 9 Suns Encirclement Array in one fell swoop. As long as they could not destroy it in one fell swoop, the 9 Suns Encirclement Array could quickly heal itself and ensure that the array would not break. With the addition of Shaoxing and the other 3, as well as a group of Sage Realm Holy Venerables, a delicate balance was formed between the two sides. The Ghost Emperor sect was unable to break through the formation in one go, and for a time, both sides entered into a deadlock. Seeing that the formation had stabilized again, Sovereign Ghost Frost's face darkened. "You're courting death. This sovereign wants to see how long you can hold on." In terms of strength, the Ghost Emperor sect had an overwhelming advantage. However, because of the formation, the Ghost Emperor sect couldn't do anything to the Saint Palace for a while. If it was just an ordinary Saint-level array, the Sacred Palace would definitely not be able to hold on for too long. Even if Shaoxing and the others attacked, with the strength of the Ghost Emperor sect, it would be destroyed in an instant. But now, the 9 Suns de Jura formation not only had Shaoxing and the others personally guarding it, but it also had the ability to self-heal and devour. While devouring a portion of the Ghost Emperor sect's attacks, it also had the support of the spiritual energy of Shaoxing and the others. Therefore, the power of both sides formed a delicate balance. Now, it was a matter of whose spiritual energy was depleted first. Without the slightest intention of stopping, the Ghost Emperor sect's experts continued to attack the formation. Facing the attacks of the Ghost Emperor sect's experts, the Sacred Palace's side also struggled to hold on. Time passed by minute, and at this moment, the final outcome depended on when the human race's great sage would arrive. The Ghost Emperor sect moved out, and the Sacred Palace resisted with all their might. Just as both sides were entangled, on a misty immortal mountain in the human race's territory. At the top of the mountain surrounded by white clouds, a bamboo house stood tall. Outside the bamboo house, an old man with half-black and half-white hair and a ruddy complexion sat cross-legged. A short table was placed in front of him, and wisps of fragrance slowly rose from the table. The old man's appearance was very strange, especially his half-black and half-white hair. It was very suitable for people to remember him at a glance. The old man's name was Yinyangzi, and he was one of the human race's 3 great sages. The human race forces in the entire central world could be generally divided into 3 camps, which were respectively led by the 3 great sage forces. The 3 great sage forces, the Great Sage. These were the so-called 3 masters of the human race. Yinyangzi was one of the 3 masters of the human race, the ancestor of the heavenly Yin Taiyang sect. At this moment, a lifeless old man appeared in front of Yinyangzi, who had his eyes closed, without any warning. It was obvious that he didn't have long to live. The old man looked very old, but those who were familiar with him would know that he was actually younger than Yinyangzi. However, he was Yinyangzi's servant and had always served Yinyangzi when he was young. Now, although the old man was still Yinyangzi's old servant, his cultivation had reached the half-step Great Sage realm. In the entire heavenly Yin Taiyang sect, no one dared to underestimate this old man. Yinyangzi slowly opened his eyes when the old man appeared. At the same time, the old man said in a hoarse voice, "There's news that the Ghost Emperor sect has already made their move." "Is there no movement from the Xianyuan clan?" Yinyangzi wasn't surprised at all. In such a special time of death, the great sage forces of the various clans had activated their intelligence network to the extreme. They would immediately know of any movement. Therefore, Yinyangzi received the news as soon as the Sacred Palace arrived in the Ghost Race's territory. However, among the three masters of the human race, the heavenly Yin Taiyang sect was the furthest from the ghost race's territory, and the closest was the Xianyuan clan. Therefore, Yin Yanzi believed that the Xianyuan clan would go to rescue the sacred palace. The Xianyuan clan was another great sage force of the Central World's three masters of the human race. Unlike the heavenly Yin Taiyang sect, the Xianyuan clan was a clan, an ancient and powerful clan with an extremely long heritage. Its strength couldn't be underestimated. In response to Yin Yanzi's question, the old servant shook his head slightly. The Xianyuan clan didn't go to the ghost race's territory. Instead, they went to the god race's territory to rescue another human force. The Xianyuan clan didn't go to the ghost race's territory to rescue the sacred palace, but went to the god race's territory to rescue another human force. Yin Yanzi smiled faintly. That old bastard Xianyuan still hasn't changed. He always picks the soft persimmons to pinch. Forget it, let me make the trip. I hope I can make it in time. With that, Yin Yanzi disappeared from where he stood. At the same time, an ethereal voice rang out from the void. It was an indifferent voice. I'll go first. Hurry over as soon as possible. The voice clearly came from Yin Yanzi. In order to arrive as soon as possible, Yin Yanzi took the lead and had the old servant lead the experts of the heavenly Yin Taiyang sect to come later. Please add, please vote, please recommend. Chapter 12-18. Yin Yanzi set off for the ghost race's territory. At the same time, less than 100 breaths after Yin Yanzi's departure, several figures rose into the air from the Taiyang sect of Heavenly Yin. The experts of the Taiyang sect of Heavenly Yin tore through the void above misty Immortal Mountain, causing spatial cracks to appear in the sky. Several dozen spatial cracks appeared at the same time, creating an extremely spectacular sight. The disciples of the Taiyang sect of Heavenly Yin began to discuss with each other in puzzlement when they saw so many experts of their sect had set off. Just the quasi-saint experts alone numbered close to 20. What's going on? What's happened? Something big must have happened for so many powerful individuals to be mobilized. As the disciples discussed among themselves, someone quickly revealed the truth. You still don't know? I heard that a human quasi-saint sect is trapped in the ghost race's territory. The ancestor sovereign personally led people to rescue them. The experts of the Taiyang sect of Heavenly Yin had set off together just to rescue the sacred palace. Some disciples were still puzzled. The ghost race's territory? Isn't that closer to the Xianyuan clan? Why do we have to go rescue them? The human quasi-saint sect that had appeared in the ghost race's territory should have been rescued by the Xianyuan clan. However, the Xianyuan clan hadn't gone to the ghost race's territory. On the contrary, the Xianyuan clan had gone to the god race's territory. Yin Yanzi and the experts of the Taiyang sect of Heavenly Yin knew why the Xianyuan clan hadn't gone to the sacred palace's territory and had instead gone to the god race's territory to rescue a human quasi-saint sect instead. Just as Yin Yanzi had said, the Xianyuan clan was like an old woman picking persimmons, picking the weakest ones to pinch. They were well aware of the relationship between the human race and the ghost race. A great battle was unavoidable if the Xianyuan clan had gone to the ghost race's territory to rescue the sacred palace. However, things would have been much easier if the god race had gone to the god race's territory. After all, the relationship between the god race and the human race wasn't too bad at the moment. The Xianyuan clan didn't want to fight the ghost race to the death right from the start, so he'd directly given up on the sacred palace and turned to rescue a human quasi-saint sect instead. Many human forces in the central world were well aware of the Xianyuan clan's way of doing things. Therefore, they were not too surprised even though they despised it. The Heavenly Yin Taiyang sect was already rushing towards the Ghost Clan's territory. In order to arrive as soon as possible, the Heavenly Yin Taiyang sect didn't send many people, only a few dozen. However, these people were the same as the Ghost Emperor sect. The lowest cultivation level was at the Saint Realm. He didn't know what was going on in the Heavenly Yin and Solar sect. At this moment, the conflict between the Sacred Palace and the Ghost Emperor sect had reached its climax. Several days passed, but the 9 Sons de Jura formation protecting the Sacred Palace remained intact despite the efforts of Xiao Sheng and the others. This was something to be happy about, but there wasn't the slightest trace of joy on the faces of the Sacred Palace disciples. This was because Xiao Sheng and the others had consumed a great deal of their spiritual energy over the past few days. At this moment, Xiao Sheng and the others' faces had all turned a little pale. Xiao Sheng and the other 3 were fine. After all, the 4 of them were quasi-sage great venerables. However, the situation of the other saint venerables was not so good. After persisting for several days without rest, the saint venerables' faces were already pale. The saint sovereigns were about to run out of spiritual energy. Sovereign Ghost Frost also noticed this, and a cold smile flashed through his eyes. The Sacred Palace couldn't hold on for much longer. Several days had passed, but the human great saint still hadn't appeared. Logically speaking, given the distance between the Xianyuan clan and the Sacred Palace, he should have arrived long ago if he wanted to rescue the Sacred Palace. However, the fact that the Xianyuan clan's experts still hadn't appeared meant that the Xianyuan clan had clearly given up on the Sacred Palace. The Xianyuan clan's absence was undoubtedly good news for Sovereign Ghost Frost. This way, the Ghost Emperor sect's experts would have enough time to break the formation. The Xianyuan clan is still the same as before. Ridiculous. Sovereign Ghost Frost couldn't help but feel disdain in his heart. He could guess why the Xianyuan clan had given up on the Sacred Palace. To put it bluntly, the Xianyuan clan didn't want to stand out and wanted to preserve their strength. They didn't want to fight to the death with the Ghost Emperor sect. It seemed that the Xianyuan clan didn't lose anything by doing this, but in fact, it was extremely stupid. The 100 Race War was about to begin, but the Xianyuan clan was still plotting his own scheme. He only focused on himself and not the entire human race. It was simply extremely narrow-minded. Of course, the Xianyuan clan's narrow-mindedness was a good thing for the ghost race. It was also something that Sovereign Ghost Frost was happy to see. Old bastard Xianyuan, you're already so old but you're still so stupid. Fine, I have to thank your Xianyuan clan for this. Otherwise, how could I have destroyed a quasi-saint sect of your human race so easily? Laughing coldly in his heart, Sovereign Ghost Frost gave the order to attack again, not giving the Sacred Palace the slightest chance to breathe. It was obvious that the Sacred Palace was an arrow at the end of its flight. As time passed, the Sacred Palace's Saint Sovereigns found it increasingly difficult to hold on. There were several times when the formation began to show signs of collapse. The situation was getting worse. If this continued, the formation would definitely collapse. Xiao Chen and the other chosen stood on the main square. Seeing the increasingly dangerous situation, a glint of determination flashed across their eyes. Xiao Chen said in a clear voice, "Brothers, life and death is at this moment. As disciples of the Sacred Palace, we should also contribute our strength." In the current situation, it was obviously difficult to rely on Xiao Sheng's group of 4 and the Saint Sovereigns alone. Therefore, Xiao Chen mobilized all the disciples of the Sacred Palace to work together to ensure the operation of the formation. This was the last resort. Although the strength of the disciples was far inferior to Xiao Sheng's group and could be said to be very weak, there were many of them. If everyone contributed their strength, they could at least hold on a little longer. As Xiao Chen's voice rang out, the many disciples, deacons, and elders who were still in a daze recovered from their shock. A look of determination flashed across their eyes. Immediately, Xiao Chen took the lead and sat down. His spiritual energy soared into the sky and instantly sank into the formation. Following Xiao Chen's action, Long Qing, Qin Yu, Emperor Qing, Bai Yi, and the others did the same. Under the leadership of the chosen and saintesses, the other disciples of the Sacred Palace followed suit. For a time, streams of spiritual energy, thick and thin, entered the formation without exception. With so much spiritual energy once again converging into the formation, the 9 Suns Encirclement formation, which had been on the verge of collapse, became stable again. However, Sovereign Ghost Frost was completely unconcerned. Trapped beasts are putting up a desperate fight. Do you think you can overturn the heavens with the strength of ants? Begging for your collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. You're tuning into the Mythic Realms YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.